Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome and call to order this meeting of the Electoral Area Services Committee for Wednesday, March 20th, 2024. My name is Ian Morrison. I'm the Electoral Area Director for Cowichan Lake South Scots Falls, and we'll be chairing the meeting today. I'd like to begin by recognizing that the CVRD is on the unceded territories of the Cowichan, Malahat, Subasat, Halal, Penelakut, Stabinus, Liaxin, Pakwichan, Diti-Dot, and Pachi-Dot nations, whose people have walked gently here for thousands of years. I'd like to go to Ms. Harrison on the agenda. We have some additions, I believe. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the recommendation before you is that the agenda be amended with the addition of 12 supplemental items in relation to item R1, and that the agenda as amended be adopted.
We have a mover and a seconder. Any discussion on the agenda? I just would note that I'm anticipating a bit of reordering when we get the staff reports. I think it makes sense, but we can do that then. Seeing no discussion, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Ms. Harrison, next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is adoption of the minutes, and the recommendation before you is that the minutes of the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of March 6, 2024 be adopted.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Errors or omissions? Seeing none. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? I see none opposed. That motion carries. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have no business arising from the minutes, and then we move into public input period.
Thank you. Could you please read our introduction for the public input period, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the public input period is to offer the public an opportunity to comment on an agenda item before the committee considers the item. The public input period procedure policy allows for an allotment of 15 minutes, where the speaker is welcome to comment on any item on the agenda up to a maximum of 3 minutes. This excludes items that are or have been the subject of a public hearing, and the speaker should comment in a polite, calm, and courteous manner using respectful language, civility, and decorum.
Thank you, Ms. Harrison. And with that, I would like to invite anyone that would like to come to the microphone, and you have 3 minutes. We're just getting the timer started. Please identify yourself and which item you're referring to on the agenda. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Chair. So my name is Bob Day. I am the current chair of Tourism Cowichan. I'm here today to address items on the agenda R1 and R3, not in great detail, but just to provide comment. And I'm glad that you all received our letter, and I hope you've had a chance to read it and digest a bit of it. It might not make any sense in context regarding what's written there after we see what is before you today on the agenda, because consultation hasn't taken place so far, and that's not a problem for us. But we have been engaged with the workforce housing strategy, and as many other sectors around the Cowichan Valley, and we feel and we know that we are representation for the short-term and online rental folks out there moving forward. And so we're going to carry that flag, and we're going to provide input whenever possible and whenever invited. And we definitely would love to be a part of future conversations if we can. Having no idea what the conversation is going to be at this table today will definitely dictate how we move forward and how we communicate our thoughts, as because the people out there running those operations are our stakeholders, and we wish to represent them as best we can. So we'll be continuing our outreach with those and also do our best to be outreach with this committee and municipalities around the Cowichan Valley as well. One of the items that we looked at and felt that might cause a little bit of angst, and it seems to cause a lot of angst in a couple of other sectors, the construction industry and stuff like that, is the extra permitting. And we realize that there has to be extra permitting and bylaws involved here, but when sending it back to other committees for approval and then coming back just adds to the time frame that it takes to do this. And I think you can all appreciate that when the government regulations come down that you have to play a role in, that you can't stop that, but that's going to add enough. And with everything else going on, adding another 1, 2, or 3 months to a temporary use permit process by sending it back to other committees for approval, then coming back to here for approval, and back and forth and through staff and all that is going to take a lot of extra time for people that want to carry on and they want to be legal. And this is an opportunity to do it all and just work together on getting there, because this is a lot all at once for this industry. And so we hope that we're provided as a Tourism Cowichan Society to become involved in the conversations moving forward and help this roll out the best, because it's going to be the best for everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your input. Now I'd like to encourage anyone else that would like to provide input on agenda items today. Welcome.
Hi there. It's my first time coming to a CVRD meeting. My name's Frank Wall, and I'm here to speak about R1 in today's agenda. And thank you for allowing me the time to do so. I've been a resident of the Cowichan Valley since 2007. My family and I feel privileged to rent a home in Cowichan Station. I am a Red Seal certified carpenter and have worked mainly in residential renovations, almost exclusively in the CVRD since moving here. I was also working as a licensed home inspector for a few years under the name Warmland Home Inspections. I've taken the afternoon away from my work to be here today because I have concerns about the current housing crisis and my perception that local regulations are not working to resolve the crisis, and that they may in fact be making matters worse for local people struggling to find a stable long-term home. Over the years as a carpenter, I often get asked by homeowners about the possibility of adding a suite to carriage house or perhaps building a tiny home on their property to provide some rental income to help cover the rising costs of owning a home here. Typically, I suggest that they apply to the CVRD for a permit, and in most cases, the application gets denied, being told that the addition of long-term rental units does not comply. And so the alternative of setting up a short-term Airbnb becomes the next best option for them. It would also appear that many homeowners who had rental suites available, compliant or otherwise, have taken them out of long-term rental market, preferring to run an Airbnb. Bill 35 is the BC government's attempt to, quote, turn housing units in British Columbia into long-term homes for people. It's my understanding that the CVRD wants to opt out of this, and I'm curious to know on what grounds. With a vacancy rate well below the minimum 3% required to qualify for opting out, wouldn't implementing Bill 35 benefit the residents of the Cowichan Valley who are struggling to find homes to live in? As a renter, I live with the stress of knowing that one day the good people who rent us their home will decide to move back in or decide to sell the home. And the thought of having to search for a suitable and affordable living situation for my wife and young children is quite daunting. Meanwhile, my stepson in his early 20s has been looking for a place to call his own for over 2 years to no avail. There simply isn't enough out there to meet the demand. One only need to drive through downtown Duncan to see the effects of this housing shortage. Homelessness is at an all-time high. Factor in that when a homeowner does create a long-term rental space in their home or provide a space for a tiny home on their property, it only takes a complaint from a neighbor to have those tenants evicted by the authorities. These policies all need a serious review to accommodate the region's renters, who represent somewhere between 22 and 46% of the local population. The decisions you make around STRs and LTRs will be the difference between local people finding homes to live in or local people joining the ranks of the homeless.
Frank, can I ask you to wrap up, please?
Yes. So to opt out of the Bill 35 clearly is a step in the wrong direction. Thank you.
Thank you for your input, and maybe I should give a little bit of clarification to folks. This is your chance to provide us input. It's not a question period, so our not answering is because of our policy, is it's the opportunity for you to provide input. So unfortunately, questions that you may ask will go unanswered during this period. You may hear some of the answers during the discussion when we get into a little later in the agenda. Okay. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Susan Kaufman from Salem. I would like to speak to R1, 2, and 3, and much like your first presenter this morning, or this afternoon, I do share the same concern about the lack of consultation with the public, and particularly with the APCs. The CVRD has had this legislation for quite some time, and understand that it's taken time for staff to get the information and digest it, and it's trickling in from the province. But we still have not had anything come to them. I'm concerned about the temporary use portion of this, the application and one renewal. Is it only renewed once and then that's it? When it comes to short-term rentals, I'm also concerned with the cost of maybe upwards of 1,000 applicants coming forward. And I see that there's no costing involved for staff time or allotment. And then I'm also very concerned with the statement under the APCs, and I quote, "Since the OCP is regional, a common position on such amendment should be made at the board levels." I find that very concerning. And are the LEPs becoming redundant? Are the APCs becoming redundant? And coupled with that, there was statements such as the lack of understanding in the community. I think, based on the people that are here today, there are people who are paying a lot of attention to this legislation, in particular the short-term rental operators. Also, there was a question, or a quote, "divided views concerning STRs in the community." And I'm wondering how or where that was derived from, if you've not yet had input from the public. On R2, the ESC has previously made a referral motion on ADUs to the APC, but that never happened. Concerns raised by directors at the February 7th meeting were not reflected in this report. Home plate has long been talked about, as has lot coverage, to take out the riparian and no build zones from hazardous areas from the equation when calculating maximum lot coverage. In R3, bylaw re-business licensing, only if the jurisdiction, and this is a quote from the report, only if the jurisdiction requires business licenses already, would the regional district need to have a business licensing, and that seems to conflict with the report in R3. And why would the CVRD take on the costs of a referendum or AAP that only applies to short-term bread and breakfast, and how would the cost of that, either of those applications, happen? We seem to be missing opportunities not only for the public invoice or input, but for your voices as directors. Have they been diminished? Overall, very concerned with the language regarding the APCs, public, and the deferral yet again of updated zoning bylaws. And I'm sorry, I'll just wrap up real quick. And when I mean that, I refer to R4, the bylaw compliance and enforcement policy, and R5, comprehensive zoning bylaw from the last ESC that the public was told would be carried over to this meeting, and I don't see it on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kaufman. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Stephen Disher, and I'm speaking to R1. The current housing crisis that our region is experiencing is exactly what it sounds like. It is a crisis of housing. Simply put, there is not enough housing available for those of us who live and work in the Cowichan Valley. Inevitably, what this means is that those who are more vulnerable end up being pushed into being precariously housed, or worse, living on the street. The approval of R1 would likely worsen the current housing crisis. At a moment when the province is making big changes to try to increase rental housing stock, the staff report from the Community Planning Division states that, and I quote, "The province's own guideline document for short-term rentals recommends that communities with a rental vacancy rate of under 3% not consider permitting short-term rentals, either on a wide scope or otherwise." According to the Cowichan Workforce Housing Strategy, the rental vacancy rate in the CVRD as of January of 2024 was, and I quote, "nearly 0% in all categories," end quote. If the growth of our region's rental housing stock is hindered, it then suggests that pain will be inflicted on renters. And if this is the case, then it shows me that the one inflicting the pain will be this local government. The consequences of R1 being approved would likely create a measurable increase in the trend that all of us have been seeing as this housing crisis continues to worsen. What we will likely see is more people living in tiny homes. What we will likely see is more people living in trailers. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. How are we doing for time, Ms. Harrison? How much? We have room for another person to provide input to us if you would like. Really only have a minute, but please proceed.
Thank you. My name is Jenny Holden. Thank you, Chair. I want to echo everything that has been said. I am for tourism. I am for people coming to this beautiful region to experience all that it has to offer. I am in grave concern of the consequences of R1, and I believe that the initiative taken by this province to do what it can to bring housing back into people's lives in a way that doesn't render them feeling anxious and unwell, which is predominantly the case for a growing number of people in this community. This is a serious concern, and I get the sense that there is a lack of willingness to take responsibility for this housing crisis in this room. And I look at every one of you in the eye and say, I know that you can do better and that this is your responsibility. So please respond to the words that are being said, and I'm not asking for it to be right or perfect, but that the prioritization of the well-being of the residences of this community come before those who want to come and enjoy its beauty for a couple days or weeks a year, as valuable as that is to our economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I believe that concludes our 15-minute public input period. I would just like to note, Director Martman.
I wonder if there's any other speakers that want to speak.
It looked like we just had somebody make a dash for the microphone, so I would
If so, I would-
entertain a motion to extend the period by 15
So
minutes.
moved.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Welcome.
Thank you very much for your consideration for extra time. And I just wanted to share some supporting numbers and my experience for the people who have spoken before me. My name's Natasha, and before moving here, I was on the Bowen Island Economic Development Committee for 2 years in a row. And I was in a very lucky place to hear from many different boards since we were on the Economic Committee, so a lot of people wanted to speak to us. And one of the biggest things that we noticed on Bowen, and something that I notice is in a lot of small Canadian towns, is we have all these big, beautiful, amazing homes. Some of these are generational homes, amazing places. And then you have their children or people who are new to the valley like me, who are trying to be a part of this beautiful area. And a lot of us have valuable skills to support these family homes, these pillars of the community, such as Stephen, who's a stonemason. I'm a nutritionist. And we're all here to help, but we don't have necessarily that generational money to stand behind us. And after having this, I had a similar conversation with my dad recently about tiny homes. And back in 1987, when my family was buying a house for 3 kids, a $273,000 mortgage could buy a 4,200 square foot home for 5 bedrooms for kids in Glen Abbey, Oakville, just outside of Toronto, a very beautiful area. Now that $273,000, you would have to make $757,843. So with inflation, the money the opportunities aren't there for people my age. And we're not asking for a handout. We have found a solution. People like Stephen and other people, we have found a solution. We are trying to help our community become a part of it. We just ask that we be allowed to. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. And I would look to the gallery and ask if anyone else would like to provide input to committee today. Welcome.
Hi there, thanks. Thanks for discussing this. My name's Caleb Morrison. I actually wasn't fully prepared to speak, but housing is kind of important. I'm a renter. I'm a small business owner. I work for myself. I'm also a social worker. And I think what comes to mind right now is just, supporting Bill 30, the adoption of Bill 35. And just a lot of people were talking about how precarious people are right now in their housing and how they're just a couple bills away, from living in a car or living on the street. And just maybe my experience from working with people who are just housed, who have been homeless, it really messes you up being homeless. And that experience is devastating and debilitating for years, for maybe the rest of your life. So we have to work hard for those folks who are there now, who, through numerous circumstances end up homeless, and it is just so hard to get out. So we can't let any more people get there, and so many people are so close. And I want to live in a neighborhood in a community that is thriving, is full of diverse people who from all sorts of different backgrounds. And if we prioritize property owners and tourists, that's not where we're going to live. We're not going to live in a diverse, vibrant community. We're going to live in a place of pretty homogenous group. And that's not the community I want to live in. But thank you for discussing this and for prioritizing housing and your community. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. And I would look to the gallery. We've probably got somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 minutes left in the additional period. We don't have to use it all up, and we can get to the business at hand fairly quickly. But I would just want to make sure that anyone that wants to provide input can. Welcome.
Thank you. And my name's Hannah, and I also wanted to address R1. I wasn't sure if I was going to speak, but as I've been listening to the people before me speak, I'm actually surprised at the emotion that I feel. As a renter and someone who I've lived in various rental homes in the valley, and I'm so grateful for the home that I live in now with my 2 children. Um, I know firsthand the fear. I've lived in my home for the past 6 years, and I pay $1,300 a month. And I am well aware that my landlords at any moment could easily be charging $2,400 a month for my cabin. And yet, because we have a good relationship, I have a level of security. But I do know if I were to lose this home, I likely would have to leave the Cowichan Valley, because when I look out there into the rental market, there just isn't space for people with a single income or who are providing for children. There just isn't housing for us. So I just wanted to bring, and I'm sorry for, I feel really emotional because I know people in my community who are so important and who do such important work who are in these kind of situations, and I face it regularly, and I see people leaving. And so I just urge you to consider, the emotional and mental stress that people who are in that situation deal with regularly in making this decision. Thank you.
Thank you for your input, and you did just great, thanks. Next to the microphone.
Good afternoon. My name's David Van Demeter. I wear a few hats in the Valley, but I come to you today as the president of the Duncan Cowichan Chamber of Commerce. We actually just finished a board meeting just 20 minutes ago. So we raced over here as quick as I could. Thank you for allowing me to speak. Appreciate that opportunity. The Chamber would urge you in the most strongest of ways when you take a look at short-term rentals, vacation rentals. If we end up eliminating those from our economy, this will severely diminish the ability of many of our businesses to earn money. If we have a way that we can keep short-term rentals open, I urge you to take that option and to take that track. If we lose those places, especially if we lose them now, there's nowhere for people to stay in this valley. And with nowhere to stay, why should they come? And if they don't come, they don't spend their money, the economic impact would be absolutely devastating. So please keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Ms. Harrison, how much time do we have left? We've got room for a couple more speakers. We've heard very clearly the passion that's been expressed so far. I'd invite you to come forward if you feel you have something to share. And you can do round two, Ms. Kaufman.
Can I do round two? Thank you.
Sure, go for it.
Okay. One of the things that I think is really important to take note here is the residential tenancy branch. And I believe it was mentioned in the February 7th meeting, is the rules, and as much as I feel very deeply for some of the people that are here, the rules have forced a lot of landlords out of the rental business and why they went to short-term rentals. And even with introducing Bill 35, they had added yet again more powers to the residential tenancy branch. And I think that really has to be taken into consideration in this, because what will happen is it doesn't necessarily mean that those units now that are being used for short-term rentals will actually return to a long-term rental pool, because it's just too cost prohibitive for the owners of those rentals. And I think sometimes renters want to enjoy all the amenities and of a home ownership, but not the cost. And it makes it very difficult for the rental owners to make improvements and protect the assets of their home or their units that they owned. So I think that's something that has to be considered also in this. So, and even with, I think there's, I also at the February 7th meeting, it was mentioned about a $40,000, possibility of a $40,000 renewable loan. People don't have that money in the first place to build accessory dwelling units or make units within their homes come up to that standard. So I just wanted to offer that perspective as well. Thank you.
Thank you for your input, and I think that since I think we've just about gone through anyone that would like to provide input. I'd like to just ask one more time if anyone would like to come up and share your thoughts. Please do. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Kim Robinson, and I would like to speak as well in support.
Oh, yeah, you turned it off, sorry.
I need to just
Press the button.
There we go.
There you go. Perfect.
I'll start again in case you didn't hear me. My name is Kim Robinson, and I would like to speak also on R1. I am also a member of our community here. I have 6 children who are now growing up to become adults and moving out, and I feel very grateful that we have property that our children can be on, and seeing the way that the housing crisis is impacting our community as well as many communities across British Columbia. I have a deep concern for young people. I have a deep concern for people who are struggling with mental health that are then put in a position where they are unable to find secure housing. Because I think that the impact of having to struggle just to afford groceries is something, but then also feeling like you're in a position where at any time you could be, like people have mentioned, one step away from, or one bill away from being on the street or living in your vehicle. And I think that something I would like to speak to is just the ability to think outside the box and come up with creative solutions. Because I think that this is an opportunity as a community and also beyond just Cowichan Valley. This is an opportunity to come up with some creative solutions. Like, how can this change to better our communities? How can we create a situation that is going to open up more possibilities for people to live in tiny homes, or live in cottages, or live in trailers, or things that are providing opportunities for people who are very important people in our community, people who are young people who have lived here, been raised here, and have the opportunity to give so much to our community, for the opportunity for them to remain here and be a working part of this community. And I think I would just like to open up to just ask people to maybe think creatively, think about ways that how can everybody work together on this? What are some solutions that we could come up with? How could the tiny homes that are already standing be put through some type of a process so that they are built to code? Many people who are living in these homes are building these homes to code and are building these homes knowing that at some point this is going to have to change. This is going to be something that is going to need to be legalized in communities. And I think that many of those homes are already built to code. Many of those homes are lived in by people who are carpenters, people who are electricians, people who are government employees, doctors, nurses, people who play a vital part of this community every day. So, as a mom of many children, as a member of this community, I have deep concern for our community and for trying to see us grow in a way that we're supporting people in all walks of their life, and then that housing is just having a safe, secure place to live just creates so much more of a easy way to move forward and wake up in the morning. So thank you for your time.
Thank you for your input. And I think we're nearing the end. I'll just ask one more time if there's anyone that would like to provide input to committee before we get to the business at hand. Looking. Welcome.
Hi, sorry, I promise I'll make it fast. You inspired me of a story I remembered. I went to a tiny house trade show in Abbotsford. It was very well attended. And I met a couple who lives here in Cowichan who had been here for years. And the parents were having a little bit of a crisis because they had their own tiny home and they had a teenager who obviously wasn't wanting to live with her parents and was going to go off to school. So I got to witness them talking to the owners of Ethical Tiny Homes, and they were able to get a tiny house for their daughter to be able to live in as a teenager. And then when she goes to school, they could put it onto the back of a truck and she could go to school with her tiny house. And as far as some numbers are concerned, you can get a chattel mortgage on a tiny house for as little as $10,000 down. RV companies have been doing this forever, and you can go through certified banks such as Scotia to help people like myself, a single woman approaching 40, be able to afford a home all by myself. When I was living in Squamish, I was paying about $1,300 a month for a roommate on something I was never going to own, never able to receive equity. And now tiny house payments can be less than $600 with a pad rental of in between $600 and $1,100, meaning that I am contributing to existing property infrastructure, but also I will be able to own a home. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I think with that, that will conclude our public input period. And just before I go to Ms. Harrison, I want to just give committee a chance to think about what I'm about to propose. We've got a couple of items to deal with under correspondence. I had intended to reorder the agenda to deal with the Bill 44, which is the R2 item first. But I really would like to encourage the folks in the gallery that have taken time out of their day to stay and listen to the discussion and debate that will be going on. So I'm contemplating, with the will of the committee, looking at doing R2 and R3 first, and then dealing with the Bill 44 item following the Bill 35 discussion. So. Contemplate that for a second. We will look at the correspondence items first, and I will likely take just a short 5-minute break once we've decided what order we're going to go in. So with that, I would encourage the folks that have come here and in the gallery today to stay and to listen to your local government at work and hear the discussion and the debate when we get to those items. In the meantime, Ms. Harrison, could we look at the next item on the agenda?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is item C1, which is correspondence related to a grant and aid for Electoral Area A. And the recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid Electoral Area A, Mill Bay, Malahat, in the amount of $1,000 be provided to the Francis Kelsey Dry Grad Committee to support the Francis Kelsey 2024 Dry Grad celebration.
Moved by Director Segal, seconded by Director McClinton. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Before we go to the next item, just for everybody's information, these items today will go to the March 27th board meeting for ratification. So with that, Ms. Harrison, the next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next item is item C2, which is a grant and aid request, Electoral Area B. And the recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid Electoral Area B, Shawnigan Lake, in the amount of $1,000 be provided to the Francis Kelsey Dry Grad Committee to support the Francis Kelsey 2024 Dry Grad celebration.
Turn to alternate Director Champ. Move that item. Seconded by Director Abbott. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Next would be information. Now we're on to reports. So now I turn to my colleagues. I'm suggesting that we do R2 and R3 first up and then go to the R1, which would follow. What are your thoughts? Sure. Yeah, that's it. The Bill 35 things, we'll do them together and do them first. And then we'll go to the Bill 44 stuff following the conclusion of that. So everybody's hearing, so I'm going to suggest we do that. We can do that under the chair's prerogative. I hope some of the folks will stay. I'm going to recess for 5 minutes, and we'll take that on. Welcome back, everyone. Can I get directors to take their seats? We're just waiting for Director Abbott to return. Welcome, Mr. Tippett. I have a request of you from my colleagues. So you're now set up for R1 and R3. We're going to start with R1, but I've had a request that if you could maybe expand beyond just the confines of R1 and perhaps talk a little bit about, oh, hang on. Alternate Director Champ.
Sorry about that. I would like to recuse myself, as on our property, we do have a bed and breakfast, and I would just like there to be no conflict, so I'm going to step out of the room.
Thank you, and you've declared it. Director McClinton.
Similarly, due to a perceived conflict of interest, I'm going to recuse myself for R1 and R3.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Your mic's off and you're excused. Yes. So to finish my suggestion, Mr. Tippett, could you, I think they're related, are you responsible for both R1 and R3?
Which one is R3 again? No, he's R3.
Okay, so if you at some point want to just sort of hand over, and we will deal with them separately, but I've had a request from directors to have the information put forth on both items while we're contemplating. So please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, and thank you for going to the next slide. I have to maybe give a bit more of an in-depth explanation of Bill 35 and how it works, because I've heard a lot of people today who all have legitimate concerns saying that opting in to Bill 35 is a thing. It's not a thing. Bill 35 happens no matter whether this board opts in or doesn't opt in. It's going to be delivered province-wide. The only thing that you can opt into if you're a regional district or opt out of if you're a municipality is the principal residence requirement, which is essentially a requirement that whoever's doing a short-term rental must reside on the property as their principal residence before they're entitled to rent it out on a short-term basis if the zoning permits it. So I just wanted to be clear about what opting in means. If we do not opt in, it doesn't mean Bill 35 does not affect anyone in the Cowichan Valley. In fact, it does. It will. The province is making it do that. So hopefully that helps a bit with the understanding of the context of this report. So essentially, according to my points on the slide here, province has determined that short-term rentals are reducing the availability of rental housing. I think that's definitely something you could probably show, demonstrate with facts. Bill 35 focuses on two platforms in particular, Airbnb and VRBO, and essentially requires short-term rentals to have a business license to advertise on those platforms. And as I said, that's going to be rolled out one way or the other. You saw the word business license, which relates to R3, so that's kind of one of the points of crossover here. So if Ian and I say anything that strays into your territory, feel free to jump up and give me the hook. So the opting in provision, to reiterate what I said earlier, is really a principal residence requirement only in respect of Bill 35. And it has to be done yearly by March 31st. Municipalities are automatically opted in if they're over a certain population size, and they conversely had to opt out if they wish not to have that principal residence requirement apply to them. They had to do so a month before, so like at the end of February. And so what's facing the committee today in terms of this particular report is if you are intending to opt in, Now is a good time to do it, and the board would presumably ratify that on the meeting of the 27th, and then we'd have time to get our notice in time under the deadline imposed by the province. And again, this was pointed out by some of the earlier speakers. The province considers a healthy residential rental market to be a vacancy rate of over 3%, and ours is well below that, you know, probably basically nil. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Oh, okay, he's giving me the hook.
Before you leave that slide.
Not the hook, but supplemental information.
Yes, just a clarification on bullet number 2. You don't have to have a business license to advertise, but what will happen, so regional districts that do not have business licensing aren't necessarily required to have the business licensing, but what could happen is that somebody who has, the zoning does permit it, the owner could they could list, because they could get on the registry, and if they're on the registry, then they would be able to advertise. So you can actually get on that registry without having a business license. So just to clarify that point.
Yes, thank you.
Director Martman?
Just for the audience, for the people in the gallery, they maybe introduce their speakers.
Oh, well, that's not a bad idea.
Oh,
Mr.
yeah.
Tippett, would you identify
Mike
yourself and
Tippett.
your role?
And Ian McDonald.
And your role?
Oh,
Your title?
I'm the manager of community planning, and Ian is the manager of building inspection and bylaw enforcement.
Perfect. Thank you, Director Martman. Go ahead.
Yes, and thanks to Ian for that clarification, because you're right, we don't exactly know how this is going to work in the event that the board, or, well, the committee today and the board later chooses not to get into business licensing. As I said, Bill 35 will still apply, so it's not true that people wouldn't be able to get to be able to advertise on the platforms if they didn't have a business license, if there is no such function. So, back to the, are we on the next slide? Yes, we are. Okay, so obviously short-term rentals are a fairly prevalent thing in all communities. The question arises in respect of opting in or opting out of the principal residence requirement on how many of those properties where they may be occurring, where short-term rentals are occurring, is the use actually legal under zoning? And I can't answer that question, but I suspect the vast majority of them are not legal. And the reason I say that is the first bullet point here. There's roughly 83 properties in the entire Cowichan Valley electoral areas that explicitly permit both a full-time residential use and short-term rental. And probably when you add up all the number of units there, it's under 100, even though, you know, the property count's a little bit lower than that. And of those, like about half or a bit more than half of the units are on a property that historically was zone C4, which is a tourist commercial zone before it was rezoned to LR11, which is kind of a hybrid residential zone up in electoral area I. That's the cottages at Marble Bay. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is if the committee and the board decide to opt into the principal residence requirement of Bill 35, it would only affect those 83 properties. It would affect nobody else in the valley because those short-term rentals are not legal. And so that's more of a question for bylaw enforcement, sort of over in Ian's realm again. So at the moment, at least, the reason the recommendation is to not opt in is because there are probably very few of these 83 properties that are eligible that are, going to require a business license for that type of use if we get into business licensing, and I just didn't see a really strong case for it. If conversely, short-term rentals were permitted in the zoning everywhere, which is not the case, yeah, absolutely, this would be a key issue. So that's a bit of context. Now, what I should also say is if we do opt in, the number of legal short-term rentals could conceivably increase if any temporary use permits are granted or other changes to zoning that may occur. So, I mean, eventually over time that could happen. However, the 3% threshold of normal residential tenancies would factor in, I should submit, to every one of those decisions that the board would have to make in the future. Is it advisable to rezone additional properties for this use? on a particular site, given that the vacancy rate is so low. So there's a little more context for you, I hope. So the second bullet down here is just concerning the possibility of the regional district sort of on its own initiative, taking a look at the situation region-wide, given that only 83 properties are permitted to have short-term rentals, and trying to identify other neighborhoods, sites, or whatever that might be suitable for that use. I'm suggesting here in this report that that's not going to be a fruitful enterprise because we don't have, a vacancy rate that the province would consider to be reasonable to consider widespread changes in that regard. So that's why we're not recommending that approach. The two other sort of methodologies where individuals who wish to have this use could potentially seek approvals are the two bullets below that. So site-specific rezoning applications and temporary use permit applications. The temporary use permit application would require, firstly, an amendment to the official community plan for the electoral areas, because right now it doesn't contemplate the issuance of temporary use permits for short-term rental. So the opportunity to engage with the Advisory Planning Commission, it seemed to staff that an appropriate time to do that would be after some of these fundamental questions of whether we're going to have a business licensing program or not, what our approach is going to be on the legality or illegality or even enforcement of existing short-term rentals in the valley. Staff felt it was appropriate to get some clarity on that before engaging with APCs on the question, and that's why we haven't proposed to do it yet. However, we are planning to do it fairly soon, following, in the wake of whatever decision this committee makes. And we're also proposing a public webinar that would, we hope, maybe answer a number of questions in relation to this, seek, input from people who are interested in the topic, and see if that can give the committee in the future, subject to some other report, some additional guidance to use. So I think we can go to the next slide, please.
Before you move off of there,
okay, sorry.
I'd like to, I'm really trying hard not to interject, and I want to open it up to directors for pertinent clarification questions, because one of them that is stuck in my mind and has come up a number of times is we're talking short-term rentals, but I also would like to hear from staff a clarification on the definition and the ability of residents, owner-occupied residences, to be able to offer a bed and breakfast rental within their zones. My understanding is that bed and breakfast is a permitted use in most of the CVRD's residential zones, maybe even some of the other zones. So could you give us some clarity as to that aspect of bed and breakfast? We don't have to go into the definition of what a bed and breakfast is unless you feel you want to, but some clarification on that, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. That's a very apropos suggestion. So when we're talking short-term rentals, or at least when I'm talking about them in the context of this presentation, I'm referring to buildings that are otherwise vacant and only have visitors in them. They don't have a host. Where you do have a host, it is normally what we would consider to be a bed and breakfast scenario. And every one of the zoning bylaws, as Director Morrison pointed out, does permit bed and breakfast in a number of the single detached dwelling zones, subject to a number of criteria. And one of the criteria is that the operator of the bed and breakfast has to live there. It doesn't have to be the owner, but the person who's operating it must live on site. In some cases, they're allowed to have an additional employee who does not live on site. The other thing, so that's kind of the same thing as the provincial residency requirement for short-term rentals, right? It means there is a residence there already. Any extra rooms they may have that they wish to rent out for guests are okay under the zoning. And I don't want to steal Ian's thunder, but he will be speaking to this point in report number 3 in respect of bed and breakfast and business licensing. So we don't really know how many bed and breakfasts there are in the valley, but we suspect there are quite a few. I've personally been in a few of them myself, and I know they provide a significant service, and at the same time, they are also a residence for somebody. So arguably not exacerbating the shortage of residential properties at least. So I don't know, is that sufficient, or do you have something
Well,
else?
I'm desperately trying hard not to get into discussion and debate, but I think that point was specifically important for clarification, and that we've heard from industry that there is dire consequences to potential decisions that are made today, and yet there is still a legal permitted use available to people that are resident in a property to be able to provide accommodation services today as we sit here.
Yes, and I mean, certainly compared to the 83 units where it's possible legally to have short-term rentals where the owner isn't present, there are thousands of properties that could have bed and breakfast on them legally.
Great, thank you. Director Deck, you had a question, a clarification?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering, I think the problem is long-term, there's not enough long-term rental. So how are we helping people needing long-term housing with this bill,
Okay.
this report?
Okay, Mr. Chair, I think part of the answer lies in the other report on Bill 44.
Yeah, I was going to say that's really relevant to, it's a relevant question to the other one that we're not debating right now. This
Oh,
is
okay.
specific to the short term,
But,
and so.
If I may, I would
Please,
add
go
though
ahead.
that the, you know, the province is imposing Bill 35 everywhere, and we're, given this report and the one that Ian's going to be presenting, we're suggesting an appropriate response, or at least what we think is appropriate to do our part in helping the province fulfill its Bill 35 agenda. But, you know, beyond that, there's nothing specific in this proposal that would sort of add to that. However, Bill 44, that's a different story.
And so, my apologies for sort of triggering questions before you were completed in your process, but I think it's perfectly relevant if you have a question for staff of clarification purposes. Let's not get into the discussion and debate just yet. And I'll go to Director Wilson, followed by Director Nicholson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I suspect that the question I have may actually be to do with Bill 44 as well. But if it is, by all means, you know, feel free to step in. One of the things that I'm not hearing here, obviously, is some of the questions that have been asked by the folks in the audience here and about the rental uncertainty and the precarious position that they're in. So maybe that's to do with Bill 44. I'll bring that up later. But one of the questions that I have here with Bill 35, is it an all or nothing thing? Is there any room for any compromise, or is there already compromise there? It's a very complex situation, this, Mr. Tippett.
Mr. Tippett?
Yeah, I mean, really, the only substantial decision facing the committee today is whether to opt in or not to the principal residence requirement in respect to Bill 35. So it's not that, I mean, staff is recommending not just because there aren't that many properties where it would apply to, only 83 of them. However, if the committee chooses to recommend in favor of that, that's fine too. We can work with that. I think, so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of the other issues that were discussed by the people who spoke during the public, you know, the initial session of this meeting have a lot of excellent points. I mean, there's something about the way society is organized these days that it's leaving a lot of people out on the outside, and that's not a healthy thing. And, you know, we need to recognize that and do what we can to try and improve it. I don't think we can have all the answers, but little pieces do help. So we're keeping that in mind when, you know, writing reports like this.
Thank you. Director Nicholson.
Thanks. Thanks for this. I am sorry. I have to apologize. I am super confused at this point. So maybe just if I talk it through, you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. there's 83 properties that we can have short-term rentals. And apart from the Marble Bay is one example, are there other examples you can give me so I can understand what that looks like?
Yeah, one of the properties is Pebbles West in Area F, which is a vacant property right now, but it's zoned for a kind of multiple use sort of scenario. And at build out, if it does build out, they'll have 96 units there. It's right on the waterfront. It's a former log sward. Cottages at Marble Bay looks like a residential subdivision when you go through it. When it was built, it was zone C4, tourist commercial. It's since we developed a hybrid zone there that allows short-term and long-term residential, because there's kind of the opposite problem there. It was zone C4. People were buying in and living there full-time because they liked living there, and they were actually not living there legally, and so the zoning change there was to to make that legal. Sandy Beach Resort in Electoral Area A was a recent rezoning that was approved by the board. It used to be a fishing lodge back in the 1920s and kind of was totally non-conforming, and now it is conforming. So that's another one of the sites that I think they have 13 cottages, or what do they call them, cabins there that can be either lived in full-time or rented out. So that basically that list comprises most. There's probably a couple of other outliers. And to be clear here, when I talk about short-term rental, I'm not talking about hotels, right? I'm not talking about, the Wessex Inn and Cowichan Bay or, or the big hotel there. It's just like residential properties.
So they're permitted currently to have short-term rentals, but do they, or is it?
We don't know, because this is one of the challenges about not having a business licensing process is we basically set the table with the zoning regulations, for example, bed and breakfast, and say, okay, here, if you do meet these conditions, you can have a bed and breakfast. Then we really have no idea how many people actually take up that opportunity.
And so what you're saying is if we opt in, they will be affected?
Yes, because, so any one of those 83 parcels, if we opt in, it would mean that in order for any of them to rent out as short-term rentals where they're not present, i.e. not a bed and breakfast, but just as a, Airbnb for someone from another country or whatever to live there for, 2 weeks or whatever it is, that would have to be their principal residence. And so the question we asked ourselves as staff is, knowing where these properties are located and their histories, does it make sense to impose that requirement on them? And the conclusion we came to is no, it doesn't. But I mean, we're open-minded. We're willing to, it's certainly an option to opt in. It might impose restrictions on some of the people who may have bought into those properties with the hybrid zoning in the first place, that they as buyers weren't expecting it to change. So that's, part of the reason for a recommendation.
Okay,
So,
I get the issue now.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think part of the question that we need to ask is the opting in provide benefits and direction that would be greater than the addition, or the issue of having to address those limited number of items, of properties that could be affected, but I really don't want to get into debate and discussion of the issue at this point yet. For clarification, or?
Yes.
Go ahead, Director Martman.
So I'll start with, from my area, North Oyster Diamond, any specific property there within those 83 that you?
I'm not aware of any, Director Martman. We did a fairly detailed review of this when the the draft report was written in February, and we looked at every zone and every zoning bylaw to see if there were hybrid type zones, and none in area H came up. I can't say 100% guaranteed that there are none, but I suspect not.
But there is some, I don't know if there's some fractional ownerships or some timeshares involved with some of the properties there.
Well,
but those are
yeah.
excluded, right? Or
Yeah,
explain
exactly.
those.
What comes to mind there is the Inn of the Sea, which is zoned actually C4. So again, sort of like the example of the cottages at Marble Bay, it's zoned for tourist, recreation, commercial. Some people live there full time. Technically, they're in violation of the zoning because those are intended to be either fractional shares where you're only there for at the most a third of the year. But there are people living there. So it's kind of, no, they're not caught by this issue at all, but there is sort of an outstanding zoning issue there as well, ironically on the other side of the coin.
So when I start, I'm trying to make a flow chart in my head because I, opt in, out, opt out, and it seems to all come down or coalesce for me about how do you ensure or motivate people that have a short-term rental and doing it, in a way that's impacting people from getting long-term. How do you motivate them to shift from that, I'm providing 1 week, 2 weeks, a month, to saying I want to do a 6 month or a year long, and that motivation comes down to first, I guess, us knowing who's doing it, and if we don't opt in, will we know? If we do opt in, will we know?
Thank you, and Director Nicholson, your microphone's on. We were getting some feedback. Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't think opting in is going to make a material difference to knowing what's out there. I believe Ian might be, he's coming up here. Okay.
There's a bit of a tag team on this. Through the chair, we're in advance, and we've said we're sort of mixing R1 with R3 right now, so this is the business licensing. One of the big advantages to business licensing is just what you're talking about. We'll know where they are. They'll have to report to us. It's a way for us to keep track of which ones and where they are. So I hope that kind of answers your question, whereas opting in and opting out doesn't do that. If the one thing that is going to come as well, another advantage of having business licenses is going to be the registry. Now, the province is going to have a registry that everybody that has a short-term rental must register with. So even if we say we didn't have business licensing, they can still register that. But if they have a business license and register that, we will get quicker access. And I can't fully explain that. It's all what I've been able to find out with reading through what literature we've got. They weren't very clear on that, but just it seemed to give preference to those who had business licensing. So that's the best answer I have for that.
And I'm just going to sort of interject that you asked some great questions that I think pertain to some of what the public input was, but I'm hoping we can get into that debate when we're actually having the debate. We're still entertaining information from staff, and so if we can sort of narrow our focus to questions and clarification. Okay, Director Martman, your final follow-up.
My final follow-up. Thank you, Chair. And I think the question is, I'm not sure it's been brought up. Well, it's been brought up. It's about the legal non-conforming. And do we have any idea on the properties? Are those within those 83 properties, or do we have other legal non-conforming properties that? Because I gather legal non-conforming is being no longer exempted. Like if you opt in, you can't use that as a defense or a...
Mr. Tippett?
Thank you. Yes, I hope to shed some light on that. So part of what Bill 35 does, this provincial law, is it takes a part of the Local Government Act that deals with zoning powers, which itself has a section that's related to what they call lawful nonconformity, where if a bylaw following the ongoing use of a property where the use was established legally sometime in the past before the advent of the new bylaw, if the bylaw changes in such a way that the use is no longer permitted, they're entitled to continue with that use almost indefinitely, subject to certain conditions as set out in the Act. Bill 35 takes that away with respect to short-term rental. So if now, for them to have protection under the lawful non-conforming sections of the Act, they would have had to have been established legally when they first began business, which, given that our first zoning bylaw dates from 1971, I suspect none of them would have lawful non-conforming rights in our area anyway. So I don't believe that's relevant to them. With respect to the 83 lots where it is a legal use now, we're not proposing to change it so it's illegal there, although I suppose, the board could decide for whatever reason to do that. In the event that we did do that to those 83 properties, then they would not be protected by lawful nonconformity, meaning they would then have to conform to the bylaw. So in short, I don't think it's particularly germane to the current situation, other than under some hypothetical scenario where the 83 lots are rezoned by us.
So Director Abbott, you've heard my attempt to, you're good? Okay. So, Mr. Tippett, feel free to complete or to continue on your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Oh, there we go, recommendation. I'll whip on the glasses here. So I'm recommending that the official plan for the electoral areas be amended to designate electoral areas for short-term rental temporary use permits. Now, to be clear, that doesn't mean it's going to allow it everywhere. It just means it'll give people who wish to conduct short-term rentals the opportunity to apply to this board for permission under a temporary use permit to conduct such a business. It doesn't mean they'll be approved or anything. It's just to give the opportunity. And that the zoning bylaw be amended to include temporary use permit guidelines. So what that is a series of criteria, one of which maybe should be, there must be a 3% vacancy rate for residential tenancies in the area before we'll consider it. The second part of the recommendation is that the development application referral policy be amended to require any temporary use permit applications for short-term rentals to be referred to advisory planning commissions for the electoral area where the subject property is located. Thirdly, and we talked about this already at some length, the reasons for this, but we're not recommending that we opt into the principal residence requirement under Bill 35 at this time. It could be reconsidered every year before March 31st. And the fourth one is that we host a public webinar to inform the public of the proposed approach to STR. And what I would add to that, although it's not really part of the recommendation, is following this committee's decision, I'd like to provide a bulletin, I guess, to advisory planning commissions just to bring them up to date on where we're at in this whole issue, because it's obviously of a lot of interest to people. So that's the recommendation.
Okay, thank you for that. I've got a couple of speakers on the list. We haven't sort of formally put this on the table. I had initial desire amongst committee members to have that spill over and additional information from Mr. McDonald. I don't know, I'm getting the sense that we could probably go into discussion and debate on this item now, but I will go to the speakers first to further discussion. Go ahead, Director Segal.
Thank you. And so I still have questions for staff. I want to finish your presentation to see if my question gets answered. But, okay, so now that Bill 35 is in effect, everyone that's running an Airbnb or Vrbo has to register with a provincial thing. But if it doesn't conform to zoning, because you said only 83% of properties can have that kind of activity, what happens?
Mr. Chair, it's not 83%, it's 83 properties. We're not entirely clear on that. Staff have attended some webinars put on by the province about Bill 35, and I think the path is fairly clear if there is a business license in place about how the checks and balances will occur to make sure that the registration and, the advertising on the platform is associated with a zoning check, right? In the event that we don't have a business licensing process, we were told in these seminars that they're working on that, but we don't really have a clear idea about how it would work. I'd like to think that in the event that we didn't have business licensing, there would still be some sort of check, although it would probably be, it's speculative to imagine how it would work right now. And perhaps that's partly why Ian McDonald's recommending what he did in R3, that we create such a program because of the uncertainty about the other scenario.
Okay, so I did, a quick search. It looks like there are about 600 entire home rentals on Airbnb and 200 Vrbo rentals, which are always the entire home. So that makes me think none of those have a principal or an owner living on the property. What do you and Mr. McDonald think is the best way to make those become part of the rental stock instead of a short-term rental?
Come up. I think it's largely a question of enforcement. As I say, virtually none of those will be legal. I mean, maybe a few if they're among the 83 lots I was talking about. But, you know, the fact that they're operating right now, obviously this is a province-wide phenomenon, hence Bill 35. And it does come down to us, and I know this board gave direction to Ian to deal with it. So maybe why don't you come over and carry on.
Mr. McDonald.
Yes, so to further that, so as part of the strategic plan of the board was that Byrola will take a more active enforcement role. So it's been approved for our supplemental for a year to have an officer do that. So we will take a much more active role. So as Mr. Tippix explained, and as you're saying, most of these properties, they're already not in compliance. So even as Bill 35 comes in, they're still not in compliance unless something changes, either zoning or TUPs, whatever, some of their regulatory system happens. But now we're just looking at all of these, with the exception of those 83, as being something we would take enforcement action against. So that's where we're headed.
Do you have a final remark? Go ahead.
So much like information coming in at once.
We can do a number of rounds, and
Yeah,
I think
I'll
we're going to
go
have
for
a
another
thorough
round.
discussion and debate on this one. So I'm just going to let everybody know I've got Director Nicholson, Wilson, myself, and now Martman. And we can, oh, you want to go back on the list now? Okay, we'll get you, we'll squeeze you in there. Well, tell you what, you can go after Director Nicholson. Sorry. Director Abbott, fly at her.
Thank you, Director Nicholson and Chair. Where did
Yeah, you guys may as well stay up there.
Mr. Tippett?
Gentlemen.
If we opt in, is there a way to grandfather the 83?
Okay, first of all, opting in, yeah, as you indicated, would potentially impact the 83, and I can't think of a way to do that, just given the structure of Bill 35. So, yeah, I get your drift, but I don't know. I'll have to rack my brain a bit to think about that, but it doesn't occur to me right away.
And this is an opinion I'm hoping you can provide. Do we incentivize, if we opt out, do we incentivize more property owners getting a TUP, a temporary use permit, and taking more residences out of the permanent stock?
That's a very good question. So if we opt out, do we incentivize more people to convert residential tenancies to, I don't necessarily see the opting in and opting out as being a key to that, because the bottom line is virtually all of those uses right now are not legal, and it's more of an enforcement thing, as Ian McDonald was saying. Whether we're opted in or not shouldn't affect or won't affect how our zoning is enforced. The province has imposed Bill 35, and they'll be doing their part in it, but they also take great pains to point out that it's up to local governments to enforce their own regulations, and we have regulations. A lot of people aren't complying, and we have direction now to enforce, and I think that's what Ian McDonald is saying we're going to do.
Go ahead.
We've heard from the business community that this is going to be a big hardship on the hospitality sector. I suggest that as a board, we should be advocating to EDC that we get more full-fledged hotels in the Cowichan Valley and get the houses back into the pool.
Thank you. Go to Director Nicholson next.
So, thank you. So this is, from my perspective, this is an enforcement issue. And I'm really concerned about these 83 properties getting caught up in something, and we haven't even gone out and talked to anyone about it. I think this is the thing that's concerning me the most. We have not done any engagement with the public, and certainly some people came to because they heard about it, but, this is not good enough. And we've had time. We should have at least had a conversation with the ABCs, because this is very complicated. And from my perspective, if you're really interested in getting housing happening, then it's an enforcement issue. it's, and the province is trying to make it a little easier for us with their Bill 35 and the residential requirement, which seems to make sense, but if I don't know in my area where, if any of these 83 properties, and I haven't talked to them and understood what they're doing and, what would work to keep them viable, then it's hard to make a decision. I'm not happy about having this conversation and having to make a decision today, actually.
Thank you, Director Nicholson, Director Wilson, and myself after.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have to wonder if Mr. McDonald or Mr. Tippett or any one of the staff have got a law degree, because some of the things that come down from the province or the feds are so complicated that I don't envy your job at all trying to explain what's going on here. It's a wonder that anything ever gets done because of that kind of thing. Anyway, site-specific and TUPs. Mr. McDonald, I think this one goes to. We've talked about the business part, the business licensing part, and how that might be necessary. Do we have any idea of how long that would take if we had to do it? How long that would take to implement, and what staff considerations do we have on that kind of thing?
I'll lead to that. Through the chair, in the report, that's in essence what R3 is looking for. It's actually looking for direction from the directors to do a more fulsome report that would report back on costs and time.
Okay.
I put some, some effort was put into putting that report together, obviously quite a bit of time, but it's going to take quite a bit more and to come up with answers to those kinds of questions. So,
okay.
Without getting into what R3 would be, we touched on most of them already. Just there's a lot of good advantages to doing business licensing in CVRD. But at this point, it's probably, I'm going to say best guess is probably about 8 months.
Okay. Okay. And follow up, please, Mr. Chair. What I'm trying to do, not doing a very good job of it, is trying to keep this discussion down as quick so we can get to the points which have been raised by the people who are here to talk about Bill 44. But one of the things that really kind of worries me a little bit here, just clarify one more time for me about opting in and opting out of Bill 35. Either way, as far as I can see, we have to do it, and if we don't do it, it's still going to happen anyway.
Opting in does change one thing, which Director Nicholson pointed out, which is it would potentially affect people who are one of the very few who have zones that permit both long-term residential use and short-term residential use. It might catch some of them up. Some of them may have purchased such properties with the intent of it just being one of those two permitted uses, maybe a short-term rental. And if they live in Vancouver or somewhere else, that would trip them up. They would no longer be legally able to do it. In respect of all other properties, it's not significant at this time. If, in the event others are added to the list of properties where it's permitted, either through a temporary use permit or rezoning, then it would affect those properties as well. But at the moment, it's very, very limited. And I don't know how many of the 83 are used in that way. If I had to guess, I'd say maybe 15, perhaps. Wild guess.
Thank you, Mr. Tippett. So I've been trying to distill down a really complicated couple of files here. And we're hearing presentations from the tourism folks and the business community, and I've had Strata in my community has had a meeting about this. There's been a lot of discussion. I have had some informal discussion with APC members. And in the distilling it down to its simplest components, we have a housing crisis. And we have people that are unable to put a roof over their own head, their family's head, and costs have been driven up astronomically. And there's a lot of factors that go into that, but a major driving factor has been that someone can take a property that has been in the long-term rental market, convert to short-term rentals, online platforms, and make in a month or two what they would make in a year as a long-term rental. And at its simplest core, there isn't any long-term rental stock available to people. And my area was the area that our social services folks used to send people to because there was stock and it was affordable. So how does that relate to what we're discussing around Bill 35 and the short-term rentals? Well, I have to share this about a community member who came to me who had heard about the possibility of Area F opting into Bill 35 principal residence provisions. And he was all worried because he had been operating a short-term rental and he had been providing accommodation for fisheries and oceans folks and people that were here on movie sets and the likes, and was essentially operating a bed and breakfast and didn't know it. And when it became clear that he could simply hang a shingle and operate as a bed and breakfast, he was happy as a clam. No impacts on the community. Very few people knew that he was even operating a short-term rental or a bed and breakfast. So it brings me back to, at its core, it's the simplest factors here is the province has given us a very clear indication that the illegally operating short-term rentals are, their time is up. That there is a sincere and concerted effort on the province to pull back on the proliferation of short-term rentals where there isn't an owner, occupier, or a resident, and to attempt to bring those back into the long-term market. So when I look at this resolution, I agree with everything that's in there, except, and staff can't make this recommendation, the question of opting in is not a question of opting out. Like we're out unless we say affirmatively that we're in. The value that I see in opting in is that, and it's a political one. So staff can't make this recommendation. The political one, and I think it far outweighs any of the 15 properties that we may have to make special dispensation for. The political value in saying that we as a community opt in, it means that we're supporting those people that need long-term rentals. It's supporting and agreeing with the provincial government's intention to heavily regulate the short-term market. And it's really that simple that we're going to make, if we choose to opt in, we are making a loud and firm statement to those people that are operating illegal accommodation services, commercial accommodation services, that time is up, that they can choose to go into the long-term market, or they can sell their property to someone that wants to either reside there or operate in the long-term market, or they can even operate a bed and breakfast. But the opting in is a loud and courageous and affirmative resolution that we would make to say that we're supportive of the provincial regulations that have been brought in and that we're going to move forward supporting families and renters as opposed to people that have the luxury of a second dwelling and usually in a nice recreation area, and that we're going to support those people that are struggling to put a roof over their head. So it's a very political statement. I appreciate the fact that staff can't be giving us political direction, But that's what I feel we'd be doing by opting in. We'd be saying that we want this to be an affordable, great place to live for everyone, and that this is a statement in support of those people, a lot of them who are in the gallery today, as opposed to furthering the economic interests of people that have the luxury to buy second and third homes. So I'll stop there. I'll go back to my list. I've got Director Martman, Deck, and Abbott, and Segal again. So Director Martman.
Are we making statements or are we asking
are.
questions? So I'm just trying to clarify because I don't want to get into back and forth with the chair, but anyways, I'll ask questions at this point. I do have my view on what you've just said. The question to staff is just, again, these are the nuances because to me, this bill is actually giving us, for the first time, in my understanding, like this concept of a business license. And because this hasn't come up before, it's giving us a new tool. Is that correct? Is that an assumption? I have a follow-up.
Yes, Mr. Chair, it is correct, but I think it's more fulsomely discussed in R3.
So, and then the follow-up though is, so if there's a business license and we're able to enforce, and we'll get talking about enforcement, because, you know, when we heard from the gallery today, and I've heard from many people in my community, you know, what we choose to enforce and not enforce is of great consequence to people. And so we'll talk about tiny homes and RVs and all those types of things under the enforcement umbrella. But having a business license is something new. But this principal residence requirement of Bill 35, if you opt in, and I'll just quote from the policy that was sent around, is intended to be a floor or a minimum standard for regulating short-term rentals. A local government may be more restrictive. And I have no idea what that might look like, but if you have a business license and you say, hey, we're going to be more restrictive, then I think going to Director Abbott's, incentivizing people may be something that it would impact.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I think we haven't given a lot of, or at least I haven't given a lot of thought about what additional measures could be taken in respect of you know, business licensing conditions, for example. That's maybe something that would come out of a potential second report to the committee that Ian was talking about earlier. But yes, you're right. I mean, they have pointed out that a lot of their recent changes in housing policy are considered floors, and there are mandatory things that have to be done in some cases, and in other cases, there are optional things that should be considered. Just speaking very generally at a high level, we're currently engaged, as you know, in a review of all of the community plan policies and local plan policies, and we'll be rewriting at some point the zoning, and that will provide a much better opportunity, I would say, to dive deeper into the type of thing you just talked about now, where we can say, okay, what do we think's working with the basic default of Bill 35 and whatnot, and what maybe isn't, and can we go deeper and do things differently or tweak it and that sort of thing. And I think that's something to come. We didn't really have time since the details on Bill 35 were just announced in February to get that deeply into it at this point.
Director Deck.
So I'm completely prepared to be embarrassed about this question. But, okay, so we have a vacancy rate of less than 3% in all of Cowichan Valley, right? And so that indicates to me that there should be more options for secondary suites or, yes, or unattached ones, whatever they're called, dwellings. So how does the short-term, the thing we're talking about right now, that bill, how does that help? I don't get how it helps long-term rental.
Mr. Tippett.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I think the province has deemed that it will help, and I think it probably will. Like insofar as we, by virtue of the existence of Bill 35, are acutely aware, and I know this board's been aware of it since at least last year when they decided to hire, maybe it was more than a year ago, to recommend the hiring of an additional enforcement person to deal with bylaw violations. So I think we're well on the road to doing that. That's part of the picture. What it constitutes in terms of putting additional units back on the market, I don't know. I mean, the province has made some kind of analysis. I know, I think Director Morrison said some time ago that he figured maybe 50% of short-term rentals might go back to long-term rentals if it were to happen in his community, and that would be a win, and he would be correct. That would be a win if that's how it played out. I think the longer answer, or the more fulsome answer, is maybe going to be in Report R2, where we're talking about mandatory things to do in respect of the provincial Bill 44 requirements for suites, and then some of the optional recommendations that they have. So I can get into that when we discuss R2, and hopefully that'll give you an opportunity to provide further thought about it.
Thank you.
So just to let everybody know, I've got Directors Abbott and Segal. I think that might be round 2. And I'm hoping that we can look to getting a resolution on the floor shortly after that. I'll put Director Nicholson on the list. So Director Abbott.
Thank you, Chair. For brevity, I want to just say that I echo everything that you just said in a somewhat roundabout statement, but I'm also concerned about what Director Nicholson brings up, and that's the 83 property owners. And I'll go back to Mr. Tippett and try to ask differently. Is it possible to find a way for 1 year? I'm like you, Director Morrison, I believe in opting in, but I feel bad about the 83 property owners. That is not the greatest number of people to have to reach out to, but we're under a timeline. We have to have something done by the next board meeting.
Yes.
Mr. Tippett.
Mr. Chair. Yeah, I guess if the decision is to opt in, it could potentially affect them. Again, I don't know. My wild speculation about maybe 15 units being used in that fashion is just off the top of my head. I really have no idea. And I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't think there'd be enough time before the board meeting to actually do that, because some of them may be absentee owners who live elsewhere, and we'd have to communicate by mail or something.
I guess for clarity, sorry to interrupt, I said grandfathering, is there a way that we could opt in, but these 81 would reside just the way they are at present for 1 more year?
Yeah, I tried to answer that before, and I didn't really have a good answer because I don't know. I can't think of any off the top of my head, because we're talking about superior legislation to our own land use planning powers, and so developing workarounds to basically nullify that is risky territory legally. So I would suspect there is no way to inoculate those 83 properties against that.
So finally, they could, if there was an undue hardship, they could apply for a temporary use permit?
Not at this time, Mr. Chair. The official community plan would have to be amended first to authorize the issuance of temporary use permits. But I think more importantly, a temporary use permit wouldn't help because the use is already permitted. The zoning permits the use, so they don't need a temporary use permit. They maybe don't want to have the principal residence requirement apply to them. And there's no way to do this selectively within parts of electoral areas. And I know the mayor of Parksville is working on the exact same issue in reverse, where he wants part of his community opted out because of the way it was developed and the rest to be opted in, but he can't do that. And I think the reverse is true here. So I don't think there's a solution to that.
But might I suggest that the scenario of these coming into play would be on the basis of someone complaining to our front desk that someone was engaged in an activity that was contrary to the Bill 35 legislation, and we wouldn't be even aware of them unless a complaint was filed.
Well, that's That's possibly true, Mr. Chair, although I did hear from Ian McDonald that there's a possibility of more active by law enforcement. But yes, with our current enforcement framework, I think that's fair.
Director Segal.
Yeah, question. What are the guidelines for the TUP, or is that coming in a future?
Mr. Tippett.
Mr. Chair, the guidelines are yet to be developed. I suggested one that we might want to bring forward, which is in relation to the residential tenancy vacancy rate. So we would have to have further discussion about that. There would be, in the event this recommendation is accepted, at least the part of it in relation to amending the OCP to permit temporary use permits, there would be a subsequent report to this committee with the draft amendment, along with the suggested language that would be inserted as guidance, basically, for applications. So I can't exactly predict what they would include, but we would be all ears, let's say.
Follow up?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree that this is a political move. I find it really frustrating that if we opt in, it sends a powerful message to the community and to people who are operating illegal short-term rentals. But as we've heard in this conversation, doesn't actually make any change. So, what's the right way to go? But I'm glad to hear that we are also going to have guidelines around the temporary use permit, which gives us some control, as well as the business licensing that's related, which we can enforce. So I feel like we have some more teeth to get into the situation with those things. Although they're not so flashy, they might not make the news article.
Director Nicholson to close.
Well, I'm actually, honestly, for me, it's an enforcement issue, and we don't need temporary use permits or business licenses to enforce existing bylaws. And so, from my perspective, I have a question about have we hired someone to do this, and if we need more staff, and are we doing it now? Because to me, that would make the fastest, most impact, if from a housing perspective, is to really focus on that.
Mr. McDonald.
To the chair, as I've stated earlier, that in the budget this year that was just approved was the supplemental for an additional officer, and that the role of that additional officer is specifically to enforcing short-term rentals and short-term rentals that are not zoning compliant.
Would it be helpful if we directed, existing bylaw people to take this more seriously?
To the chair, to the chair, that's something that staff could be directed to do sooner rather than later. That could be I could bring a report forward, or just through a motion on the floor that staff get different direction as to what's currently, and it would be best to come forward with a report, because that would mean taking officers doing certain tasks, not doing those roles they're doing right now.
Director Nicholson?
I'm also wondering if, and this is probably a question for Mr. Tippett, would we be able to get a map and a list of these 83 properties by next week, so that we could understand what the potential impact in our area is?
Mr. Tippett?
Mr. Chair, I think we could probably get a map of some description prepared. I'm going to be mostly absent, but I'm sure somebody can do it for us in time for the board meeting. They're, as I pointed out earlier, fairly restricted in where they're located, so it's not, it wouldn't be an onerous problem to do that.
Follow up?
So I can so you understand where I'm coming from. I think we have a capacity issue with staff being able to do the basic work that we need to do in enforcement and so forth. So from my perspective, adding temporary use permits and business licensing and all that kind of stuff is going to be a distraction from actually getting to the root of the problem, which is enforcement of our existing regulations. And I agree that it would be helpful. I would like to be able to opt in to send that message, because it's a useful communication tool, but I am concerned about those 83 properties, and I don't have the information about what that means for electoral area E. So I would like to have that information before I vote on any motion or whatever. So that's kind of where I'm
Yeah,
at.
thank you for that. So I've got a suggestion. We have resolutions in the package that are essentially cover the gambit of what we're discussing. I was going to suggest that it would be appropriate to take a resolution that contained the 1, 2, and 4 and sever 3 and debate that separately. And that would be a path forward that, and on Director Nicholson's point, I'm just thinking about Mr. Tippett's explanation at the beginning of this, that there are, a handful here and there. So a map and the implication and the numbers that would be affected could certainly be brought forward with the recommendation as it goes to the board next week. I would look to Ms. Chirolf, if she's in the room. Oh, she's on. Ms. Chirolf, would we be able to get the map with the aforementioned 83 properties in time for consideration at the board next week?
Mr. Chair, that would be a more appropriate question for Ms. Mohan, who I think is just sitting to your left, as she's responsible for the IT and GIS divisions, and we would be reliant on GIS staff to produce that.
Over to you, Ms. Mohan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would have to inquire and get back to the board because I'm coming back from a leave and I'm not entirely aware of what GIS's workload is at the moment, but I'm certainly able to inquire, yes.
Mr. Tippett, can you help us with this?
Yeah, I hope so. And I hope this is a relief to Ms. Mohan, but I think the areas are sufficiently compact that they can be produced on a series of 8.5 by 11 sheets by planning staff. So I don't think we need a big elaborate project or anything of the sort. So that was the basis upon which I thought I could get it to the board in time for next week's meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Tippett. Director Nicholson.
Yeah, just to speak to that, a map is not as important as understanding what's in your area and where they are, like the description of them would be more helpful, Like I would be curious to know if, for example, the Maclay B&B guest house or whatever it is one of those or not. That would be the kind of information I'm looking for.
Mr. Tippett.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, that would be a bit of a taller order to try and go through existing, bed and breakfast and tourist accommodations and determine whether or not they're either a bed and breakfast or an STR. I think it would be almost impossible unless a list of properties was given to us to investigate, and even then it might be difficult. I was just thinking more of the ones that we know from a zoning check do permit both full-time residential and short-term rental use. Those ones are easy to identify.
Yeah, I think you've already sort of verbally listed them. There's cottages at Marble Bay, there's some zoning in Area F which isn't built out yet, and a couple of other items.
Yeah, there's Sandy Beach Resort and also the Stilt Homes in Cowichan Bay Village that are over the water on lease lots. That's the W8 zone in Cowichan Bay. I think there's around 14 or so units there as well. Actually, a couple of those are bed and breakfasts, we know that. So
Right.
they do conform, and the other ones that might be on short-term rentals, well, that's legal too, so that's also okay.
Does that help, Director Nicholson?
I'll take whatever you have.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I think at this point, it would be more than appropriate to entertain a motion that it contains items numbered 1, 2, and 4, if everyone's in general agreement. Are you moving that, Director Abbott? Do we have a seconder? Moved and seconded. Do we need any further discussion on 1, 2, and 4? Director Abbott, Director Deck.
1, 2, and 4, the reports, all 3 reports?
No, I'm talking about R1, recommended
Okay.
resolution, items 1, 2,
Got it,
and 4
got it.
listed in there.
Thank you.
Is everyone clear? Would you please Director Segal.
I just wanted to clarify the referral to Advisory Planning Commission. So that's in here, and we did direct that already. But then, Mr. Tippett, in your presentation, you mentioned just a kind of information packet. I can't remember what you called it.
Mr. Tippett.
Yes, Mr. Chair, yeah, there was direction last fall to engage with APCs on this, and the reason we weren't able to do it until, well, we could consider doing it around now is the province was kind of slow to release the details of the program, so it was kind of hard to engage when you don't know exactly what's happening. So yes, I would propose following this committee and I guess the board accepting the recommendation of the committee to provide an update to Advisory Planning Commission members about where we're at and where we see the future points of engagement with them on developing, TUP guidelines, for example, and things like that. And I think one of the other criteria that we would certainly recommend, if you do accept the TUP recommendation, is that every application of that nature go to the APC. I mean, it was built into my recommendation, but so yes, we'd like to give them an update to, fill that void that's been yawning for 5 or months or whatever it is.
And just a quick, so that's a meeting or like an email?
No, I was going to send them like an update with some information, and if I was invited to attend meetings, I'd be happy to do that. I don't think at that point we would necessarily have, a draft or anything to talk about in terms of the TUP amendment, for example, but be happy to meet with an APC anytime for any reason, so I'll accept an invitation.
Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the recommendations before you are that it be recommended to the board, number one, that the official community plan for the electoral areas be amended to designate electoral areas for short-term rental, STR, temporary use permits, and zoning bylaw number 4485 be amended to include associated temporary use permit guidelines. Number two, that development application referral policy be amended to require any temporary use permit applications for short-term rentals to be referred to the Advisory Planning Commission for the electoral area where the subject property is located. And number four, that staff host a public webinar to inform the public of the proposed approach to short-term rental regulation.
Director Nicholson.
I was just wondering who moved this?
Director Abbott.
Who seconded it?
Director Segal.
Okay. I would like to speak against it.
Okay.
I think that the temporary use permit aspect of this and developing guidelines and so forth is a distraction from what the real issue is, which is enforcing our existing regulations. I also think that there is an avenue for people to, if they would like to continue doing short-term rentals, to come forward and ask for go through the proper process, which is a rezoning process, and that so I think that part of it is, and I am definitely open to the opting discussion at the next board meeting when I have further information. And I definitely think that we need to do some public outreach. So that's my position. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other hands, I'm going to call Director Martman.
I'm digesting. This is a fair bit to weigh in. I'm listening to staff. I'm wondering if there's an amendment that could be made, and I'm just thinking this through. So quite fine if it doesn't go through. To pursue active enforcement of short-term rentals. Is that something that's within the intent of this motion, or should that be done separately?
Mr. McDonald.
To the chair, if I understand you correctly, Director Marmon, no, this is separate. Enforcement is separate from this report.
Director Nicholson.
I would just like to add on this issue of why I'm against temporary use permits and business licensing for that matter. There is no financial analysis being provided, and, we've just come out of a very difficult budgeting exercise where people are really hurting on the tax front, apparently, and so we shouldn't be adding on more things that are going to require resources unless we're clear on what kind of resources they're going to require. We have already agreed to fund a bylaw enforcement support so that we can pursue the short-term rental issue. So I think we should start with that and then see how it goes.
I see no further hands. I am really wanting to comment, but I'm not going to. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? Motion carries. Director Segal?
I'll move that we opt into the principal resident requirement under Bill 35.
We have a seconder. Director Segal?
So we've had, lots of conversation, and it still feels like there's a lot that I'm going to be digesting before the board meeting next week. But in my gut and in my heart, I think this is a really important message to put out to the community. I think there's a lot of people running Airbnbs that don't even know they're against the zoning. Real estate agents are promoting it in the sale of homes. So it's important to get clear messaging out there that we don't want full homes that could be housing families to just be available for Airbnb. And I know that there are particularly units like that, homes like that in my area that are being rented short term. Now, I am going to take this week to reach out to the community at Sandy Beach, as Mr. Tippett mentioned, which kind of falls into one of those 83 properties, and get some more direct information from that community, and I'll bring that to the board next week.
Thank you, Director Segal. We have a motion that's been duly moved and seconded. Then I think we're going to take a quick break after. Director Martman, please go ahead.
Thank you. In the past, I've been faced with looking at and trying to understand why are you given options? Why are you giving a choice? What's the purpose of a choice? Particularly this, down to each electoral area. It isn't across the region. And so I'm finding it in an uncomfortable position of saying, is this the right decision across that would include Area H, in the area of my residence? And I just hesitant, not because of the purpose and the idea behind it is okay, but I don't have enough information to say, what's the impact of this to my area? And I may know in a week, but I may not know in a week. And public consultation has been zero. The amount of information that I've got from my community is minimal. I've had some. And so I'm finding myself in this void of information to make a decision. And I go back to the concept of good governance and good decision-making, and I go, I just can't quite get myself there. And I'm a terrible politician. I don't do things for political reasons. I do them because I think I've got the right information. And maybe that will end up being the right political move, but maybe it won't. So anyway, so I guess I'm not in favor of this motion. I just worry that we won't have the opportunity to do this next week. So I don't know if this is the appropriate place to ask the question of, if we don't pass this or we refer this for discussion at the board meeting, is that possible?
So I've already contemplated what you're asking, and because we can do this as individual electoral areas as opposed to going through in each, and I'm going to recommend that we endorse this resolution, and that at the board, that we will ask the chair to entertain amendments to the resolution for if an individual director does not want to be in the opt-in group, that they amend the resolution at the board. Director Martman?
Sorry, Chair, to go back and forth. Conversely, then we could choose not to pass it and then pull it to opt-in.
If we don't pass the resolution, it doesn't go to the board.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Director Deck to close.
So I know the long-term effects on short-term rentals on my community. And the big problem is that the owners are not there, they're absent. So for that reason, I would be in favor of the opt-in, but it still doesn't answer my basic question about how that property then would become a long-term rental. But because it's so important to the residents that I know who've been affected, I'll vote opt-in.
Seeing no further hands, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? One opposed, the motion carries. I really need a break. We've dealt with one, we have to deal with three, but we'll deal with three when we come back. Take Welcome back, everyone. I will now ask Ms. Harrison, I think we're going to do our three next, are we not? We are.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we are.
Mr. McDonald, do you have a presentation for us?
I do not have a presentation.
Oh, okay.
However, what the report, it's detailed, but what we're looking to do is, staff is recommending that we spend some more time with it. So looking through this report for some direction to bring back a more fulsome report, looking at timeframes and costs. I would like to briefly discuss benefits. We've already, through Mr. Tippett's report, talked about some of the benefits, being that we would be able to track some of the SDRs, and probably more likely what we'd be looking at is a helpful tool for us for bed and breakfast. I did hear a question about regulation now. Mr. Tippett did answer that. We're unsure of what extra regulation. What I have looked into would be with a bed and breakfast, and if we have business licenses, I've seen other regional districts and municipalities when they're doing that. A lot of times what happens in the CVRD, it's in the zoning, so the building department issues a permit, or maybe there's already an existing building that the bed and breakfast is permitted. But because we don't have business licenses, there's no follow-up. We have no idea if they're doing it safely or anything like that. So this would be a great advantage for us to now, whether we set it to be annually, when we were to issue or renew a license, it would really help with health and safety. Another aspect of this is there's a service establishment bylaw required first. And this is the part that's going to take some time. I don't know exactly how long. I guessed at 8 months. Honestly, it was just a guess. And I don't know the cost. This was going to take some time to write a new report. That service establishment bylaw is really just to allow us to have business licensing, so it's not going to be specific to just short-term rentals and bed and breakfast. The bylaw that would follow it would be, but that would also allow in the future, once we have that service establishment bylaw, to even look at commercial properties and things. So as far as something maybe even cost-effective if we start to look at commercial activity as well, but that's really not where I wanted to go today. I just wanted to give you some insight to some of the advantages to actually having business licensing. I think with that, I will leave it for questions.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. I've got Director Nicholson, myself. Anyone else? Director Nicholson, go ahead.
So how do we recover the costs for an AEP or a referendum?
Through the chair, that is a great question, and that would come through the report that would be provided if direction is given to do this, because I currently don't know the cost of an AP. However,
Ms. Harrison.
Oh no, I thought you thought you might know. She's been involved with them before. What does it cost?
Well, my understanding is that any service that is established, the costs of the consent would come from the service, so ultimately by the participants and the licensees that become part of the program. Is that correct? Ms. Harrison? The question was, how do we account for the costs of the AAP and the associated works?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it can be as straightforward as one participant or all 9 participants. And so your costs would be multiplied by how many electoral areas were within the service. Once the service is established, those costs are charged back to that service. Is that what you were looking for? So you're looking at advertising, public information sessions, renting facilities, some might need equipment, all of those costs.
Does that answer your question? Great. Director, I've got myself and Director Deck. So you made a couple interesting remarks there, Mr. McDonald. So I was under the impression, and I stand to be corrected, that the thrust of the provincial move on Bill 35 and the business licensing in electoral areas was specific to the short-term rental question, and that we would be able to embark on business licensing with a very narrow scope of just the accommodation sector. So I just know, because we've asked this question in the community before about the idea of business licensing in electoral areas, and it's a really mixed response. A lot of folks really just don't think that local government has any business in their business, but it is a very valuable tool in being able to establish policy and the like. So can we limit the scope of the business license program to just the accommodation sector?
Yeah, and my apologies if I wasn't clear in what I was saying there. The intent, and it's in the report, is that it is strictly for STRs and B&Bs. That's all we're looking at. But what I was saying is that the advantage of doing the service establishment bylaw, it's not restricted. So if somewhere down the road, 10 years down the road, if you choose to go that direction, that option is available. It's not like we would have to go through this process again. So what I'm saying is that we have that established, but we have to have that first, and then we can have the bylaw for business licenses. But that business license bylaw they'll bring forward would strictly be short-term rental and bed and breakfast.
Thanks. I'm going to back up and go to Director Nicholson because I see something top of mind there.
Well, then could you clarify for me, do we need a service establishment bylaw if we have a very restricted use of a business license?
Yes.
I see nodding in two areas here. So yes. Director Deck.
Just wondering how the business license and business tax, if they're connected or if they're two separate, how they work. Because, yeah, I just need information about that.
An incredibly good question that I cannot answer. I'm sorry, I don't know if anybody from finance could answer that. I don't know if anybody from finance is online. I didn't see Tracy, but maybe Mike can answer that.
I'll try to
Mr.
help.
Tippett.
Yeah, sorry. I'm probably the best proxy we have to try and answer the question. Administrative processes like permitting for business licensing are only entitled to recover the administrative cost of running the program. They cannot collect more. If they do, it's called a tax, and we're not authorized to do that. So the short answer is it should be self-financing, but no more.
Thank
Director Deck? Okay, there is the other question of assessment by use and the whole bit, but that's an entirely different question. Got Director Martman, then Wilson.
Thank you. The issue in front of me is, it's funny how a business license can be utilized for different aspects. And I was focused strictly on enforcement, but you're also looking at compliance of meeting certain items like a B&B. So my understanding, if a previous conversation is, we're not zoned for short-term rentals unless they are a bed and breakfast.
That's correct.
Generally.
Yeah.
Across the CBRD. So to bring bed and breakfasts under the umbrella of a business license isn't really an enforcement issue. It's about, well, now we'll know who it is, and now we'll know if they're doing it safely, and now we'll know if we have any issues with them doing it. It's sort of the guess where you're going. And it's going to take time, and it's going to take funding, and it's going to take more government, and I know from my area what their thoughts on that is. So I'm really interested in exploring what is it that we need to give you today, in your opinion, that will help you move into, can you identify who are out there doing the short-term rentals that aren't B&B and take action and work on the enforcement and compliance on the short-term rental? So is that a question? I think so.
It's actually doesn't have anything to do with the recommended resolution. I know it's not on the floor yet, but
Yeah.
this is to research and report back on the establishment and the cost.
Thank you.
So, do you want to take a crack at that? Like, it's not really germane to your report, but.
No, and it's a bit outside of what I'm looking for guidance on.
It is.
Like, we're bringing
I
back,
thought so.
that is something that could, different direction, I think.
Yeah. Director Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. And Director Deck has actually asked part of the question that I was going to ask anyway, as far as the business license issuance is concerned, how that might affect the tax. And the chair has already pointed out that the assessment part of that would be something beyond our control. However, if a home is being run as a business, as it would be, because they have a business license, is there then any need for the local government authorities to inform BC Assessments that the use of that home has changed, so that we get the benefit of extra tax?
Through the chair, very good question. As I understand it, so if they want to advertise, they go on to they apply to the province to be on the registry. When they're on the registry, that registry would be shared with BC Assessment.
Okay. And final follow-up, please, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
As far as I can see then, this is purely a report on, as I asked earlier, how long is it going to take and how much is it going to cost, and that's what's going to be covered in this report. So
Yes.
if that's it, I have no problem with this one. Thank you.
Director Nicholson to close.
I don't have a problem with the report, but I think it might be wise to wait until we have more information from the province on what the advantages of having business licensing would be relative to their new, whatever they're calling it, provincial compliance on online platforms, because, it's just going to take staff time, and we could use that elsewhere, I think, right now, and when we have that information, we'd have a better report. And I also actually don't think business licensing is going to fly easily in the community.
Looking for a resolution? We have a recommended resolution in the staff report. Moved. Seconder. Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Director Segal.
I liked what Director Nicholson brought up. Is this, is there a real time pressure on this, or can we wait for more information from the province?
To the chair, one of the reasons I bring it forward is we're trying to align with what the province is doing, and this, to even do business licensing, is going to take some time. So we're trying to start the ball rolling now, so that's why, before we spend a lot of resources now, in case this is something that was not a flavor for the directors, that's why I'm putting this report forward, going to say, do you have an interest? So if there was no interest, then we would write a report. But if there is an interest, then we will put more resources into this, writing this report.
Okay.
And just, on the timing perspective, I would hate for us to get 8 months down the road, a program be rolled out, and us turning around and saying, well, why didn't we do this work in advance when it could have been done? So, we have a resolution could you please read the resolution, Ms. Harrison?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that staff investigate and report back on the process and costs associated with establishing a business licensing service for short-term rentals and bed and breakfast accommodation in the electoral areas.
Everybody ready? I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? One opposed. The motion carries. Let's get our wayward directors back in here. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. We did. Mr. Tippett, please proceed on R2.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This report is concerning implementing the requirements of the Housing Statutes Residential Development Act, which is otherwise known as Bill 44. You'll recall I brought a report to this committee in February that was referred back to staff at board. This is the fruits of that referral. Hopefully it's a bit more understandable or to your liking. So get a bit into the Bill 44 part of it first. But maybe before getting into the details on this slide here, I'll just talk generally about Bill 44. It's a package of both requirements and recommendations for local governments generally to try and enhance the access to housing. The perception of the province being, and it's probably not incorrect, that zoning regulation has been part of the reason for the shortage of housing these days. So to be putting this report into context, what I have done for the purposes of complying with Bill 44 is meet the minimum requirements, not some of the optional stuff that they ask us to consider, because that'll probably take a bit more detail working with advisory planning commissions and so on, into what are now the Bill 44 compliance bylaws. So the drafts you saw in February contained not only Bill 44 elements, but other elements which were complementary to Bill 44, but not necessarily required by them. So that's the general background to this. So we're obviously required to ensure under Bill 44 that attached or secondary suites, as they're typically called in the bylaws right now, are permitted in all zones where a single detached dwelling is the principal use. We're not allowed to specify minimum site area. What that means is a certain area of land that one has to have before you can have a suite. That's taken away by Bill 44. We cannot require the owners to occupy the principal residence. It's not to say it can be a short-term rental, just for clarity. It just means someone has to live there, but it doesn't have to be the owner. Because some of our bylaws do require the owner to reside in a property if it's going to have a suite on it. That has to go. Furthermore, these changes, which are required to be done by June 30th of this year, have to be done in the absence of a public hearing. The province has interdicted a hearing for any Bill 44 compliance bylaws. Yeah, so I guess you could go to the next slide, please. So what I'm going to do quickly is just roll through some of these amendments here. Is this a right presentation? Can you go to the next one? Oh boy, no, this is the wrong presentation. Oh, how did that happen? I wonder if you could bring it up from the end drive. It's under number 13, 6420. I'm sorry about this. That was the presentation from February. Somehow that got in there.
Well, you're on the wrong side.
Okay, sorry about that. Michelle will be shortly sharing the correct PowerPoint. Oh, we'll get there. Yeah. Well, I think I've already summarized this because the previous presentation made the same points because it's really the same topic. What is new on this slide, though, is at the bottom. In the previous iteration of this coming to the committee, some points and very good points were being made about how water is proven for building permits and suites, and the short answer is there was a bit of a gap there, and so the fifth bullet on this page is showing that there would be a new works and services bylaw that's complementary to not only Bill 44 related changes, but just any property that may be vacant that doesn't already have a well on it or some source of water to require them to prove water. I can get into more detail if you like, but I'd maybe just ask Michelle to go on to the next slide, please. So, as I noted, the Bill 44 bylaws have been kind of hermetically separated from the mix that they were at the last committee meeting, and so the numbers are the same, but they now only contain Bill 44 mandatory elements and nothing else. So, for example, no detached suites being permitted without site area requirements and so on. And this is just a list of those numbers. Go to the next slide, please. So, getting a bit into the Works and Services Amendment bylaw, I've gone to the point of giving it a number because we expect that, or at least we hope that it might move forward. It would require proof of water at the building permit stage in the form shown under these two bullets. So if you're on a well or you're basically not a community water service area, there'd have to be a written report from a certified well driller, engineer, or geoscientist stating that the source is licensed, potable, and has sufficient volume for the use proposed, be that a suite or a new dwelling or whatever it may be. And if you're on a community water service, there'd have to be written approval from the purveyor of water, which often is the CVRD, but not always, indicating that their supply is adequate to handle the additional development as well. Next slide, please. So this table looks kind of messy, but it's a way to try and explain the various bylaw numbers that are all attachments to this report and their context. So the electoral area column on the left-hand side just shows the different bylaws, A and C together, area D as 2. And those Bill 44 bylaw numbers are the numbers that existed before, and again, they're now restricted just to Bill 44 materials. The column headed Works and Services just indicates that the same bylaw would apply in all electoral areas if it was adopted. On detached suites being liberalized by reducing the site area or eliminating the site area requirement, that is proposed in the bylaw numbers noted under areas A and C, I should say, area B, area F, and area G. The others have no special provisions in respect of detached suites. So area D would have none, area E would have none, area H would have none, area I would have none. And then the bylaw maintenance element is also built into the same bylaws that deal with suites in areas A and C and B and so on. And these bylaw maintenance efforts are not related to additional units or anything. It's just about new definitions to try and harmonize our understanding of what a dwelling is, how you know, the name we use for suites and that sort of thing, spelling error correction, other structural problems within the bylaws being corrected. So instead of the 9 bylaws we had in February, we now have 19, 18 of which are with respect to electoral areas, each of which has 2 that would apply to it, and then the general works and services bylaw that would apply to all electoral areas. So anyway, that table, hopefully, for me, it kind of made sense. Hopefully it helped a bit. Next slide, please. So just jumping to the recommendation, I'm recommending here that the draft zoning amendment bylaws for all electoral areas for increasing opportunities to suites regarding bylaw maintenance, satisfying provincial legislative requirements, amending the works and services bylaw be forwarded to the board for consideration, that improvement districts and private utilities within the areas affected by the proposed amendments be notified of the draft bylaw that applies in their service area, as opposed to a referral, because a referral would not be appropriate given the Bill 44 limitations. Thirdly, that amendment bylaws that are applicable to lands within 800 meters of a controlled access highway be referred to MOTI. Notably, Area I is not subject to that. And the fourth and final recommendation is that a public hearing not be held in respect of the bylaws that are not Bill 44 related. So again, Bill 44 bylaws, we're not permitted to have hearings. The other bylaws, which are related to bylaw maintenance or in some cases detached suites, we could potentially have a hearing. Staff's recommending not to have a hearing. However, we will take direction from the committee as necessary and move forward however you wish. So that's the presentation. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer them.
I suggest you stay there, Mr. Tippett. I've got Directors Abbott and Wilson. So Director Abbott, please proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Tippett. You referenced none for, in the table that you were showing for Area D and some other areas regarding detached suites. What does none mean? Are they not allowed in Area D?
No, what it means is there would not be any change made to the existing detached suite regulations. We don't call them detached suites there, by the way. We call them accessory dwellings, I think.
But is the nomenclature going to change?
Yeah, well, in the draft that came out in February, where it was all included under a single bylaw, it included a provision saying if you're going to have a detached suite, or in your case, an accessory dwelling, you must have X hectares of land in order to have it. So that's the only change that was proposed that's now been removed in direction based on previous, well, I guess it was after the meeting that you and I spoke about this. So it doesn't mean they won't be permitted. It just means that they'll still be subject to the same site area requirements that they are today.
If I may, Chair. You also referenced owner occupants do not need to reside. Can somebody do a fiddle and get back into renting it out to a non-owner? And then we're back to what we just spent hours discussing on 35?
Mr. Chair, that's a very good question. I think legally, no. You know, our existing bed and breakfast regulations kind of deal with the same thing. We have a resident of the site has to operate the business. Similarly, where we do have a requirement for an owner to live on the property in order for it to be able to have a suite, that's what's being proposed to be removed in some areas. It doesn't mean that we're sanctioning short-term rentals in the main dwelling, and far from it. It's not permitted. It's just like, does it matter to us if an owner lives there or if they're renting the entire house to someone else? I would submit it doesn't, but I'm willing to hear other opinions, of course. So, yeah.
Director Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mike. Could you go back to the slide where it mentioned connection to water? Here you go. First time proof of water at the building permit stage. And then I'm referring mainly to wells.
Yes.
Through a written report from a certified well driller, engineer, blah, 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 the source is licensed, potable, and has sufficient volume for use. Let's assume then that there is already a well on. The owners would have to produce that well registration. Is that correct?
Yeah, it would be a requirement for any additional, like, for example, if they're building a suite, that this would trigger this requirement, whereas, perhaps when they built the house originally, it wasn't a requirement, but I would presume they'll have a water source. Hopefully it's licensed, because everyone's supposed to have a license.
Right. Quite an important point as far as I can
Yeah,
see.
and I think it might give us, or might give people an incentive to try and legalize wells that might not already be on the radar yet.
Yeah.
Hopefully most are, though. I mean, I'm sure there are some that aren't. I know there are some farmers that have unlicensed wells in Cook-Sila watershed, but
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. And follow up, please. The mention of 800 meters within a main highway.
Yeah.
Splitting hairs here a little bit, because if you draw an 800 meter circle radius around my house, it's within that area. But if you actually go on the road, so which one do the MOTI go on here?
Well, yeah, this requirement is in the Transportation Act, actually. It's a way that the province retained some control over land uses that could impact highway traffic patterns. And so how it actually works is, first of all, a controlled access highway, we only have two of them in this entire valley. One is Highway 1, the other one is Highway 18. All the rest are just local roads, so none of those would apply. So how it actually works is the Transportation Act says if part of the bylaw affects an area within 800 meters of an intersection of the controlled access highway, so think about a stoplight, or in one case we have an interchange in Area A at Bamberton.
So a 400 meter radius or?
800
800
meters.
radius, sorry, yeah.
That the bylaw is null and void unless it's signed by the minister or his delegate. And in this case, we just have the practice of sending all bylaws that in any way, shape, or form are touched by that requirement to the ministry, just so we don't have to get into the splitting of the hair four ways, like you said. It's just easier, and usually the approval is a rubber stamp. I mean, there are occasions in rezonings where this is a big deal, where they're looking at a major shopping center or something, fronting on the highway, and they go, whoa.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Yeah. And this Bill 44 to me, and this is more of a comment than anything else, to me it's an important and much needed step. As we've heard from a lot of people here, it's going to open up the doors to that kind of thing, and it's going to address a lot of the questions that I've been getting from residents about, can I do this, can I do that? So great, I will be supporting this, and I'll be making sure that I post the link up of this discussion to social media as well, so people can watch it and listen to what was being said. Thank you.
Director Segal.
Thanks. I have a question continuing on that, the water license, just the wording. I thought groundwater for domestic use didn't need a license, just need to be registered.
Sorry, you're right. I think the terminology I used was incorrect.
Okay, great.
Director Bertman.
Although if you have a detached suite, is that domestic use?
Mr. Chair, that's an interesting question too. The province's position on that is that detached suite that uses the same water source as the principal residence means that it's a water system that requires all of the checks and balances that a CVRD water system requires, including professional operators and everything else. I'm not sure how they enforce that. I expect that given that, any professional who is being asked under the Works and Services Amendment proposed here, if they were asked to certify a situation like that, they probably couldn't in good conscience do it if they knew that, those checks and balances, as I say, weren't in place. It would probably be easier for them to drill a second well if they can.
Director Martman.
Sorry, that wasn't really, that was just a follow-up of the other director. So the question I have is two questions, so I'll throw them both out there. The standards for proof of water, we don't get explicit on that in the bylaw. So would we be getting explicit somewhere else what we deem to be proof of water? And the second question is, what's the big picture on this? Because I'm just thinking of Area H, and does Area H, does it really make a difference in terms of the Bill 44, in terms of adding more potential housing? Or is it already zoned to have all those pieces already?
Mr. Chair, let me see, what shall I start with? Maybe I'll start with the second question first, and by the time I've answered it, I'll have forgotten the first one. Yeah, Area H generally is a pretty rural area with larger parcels. The site area requirement for separate suites, as they're called there, which is like detached suites, do exist, or actually, I can't remember, maybe that's one of the bylaws where it doesn't exist. In any case, I don't think it would make much difference either way. So Bill 44 is probably in practice not going to have a very visible impact when we talk about the mandatory bylaws that we're supposed to adopt by the end of June on the appearance of communities. The bigger effect will probably be found in areas with smaller lot sizes where a lot of parcels were excluded from having suites by our own regulations, which said you had to have a certain size of lot, which happened to usually be fairly large, that they couldn't meet. And I think a lot of those either will be able to have a suite for the first time, built legally, or maybe seeking a retroactive approvals through Ian's division for existing illegal suites. So the effect it's probably going to have overall in addressing the housing shortage is, probably measurable but not huge. Bill 44 does have much more aggressive provisions when it comes to municipalities, particularly those that have really advanced transit systems and so on, where they're saying in some cases what used to be a single-family residential zone has to have zoning that permits up to 6 units if you're within a certain, walking distance of a major transit hub. That'll probably have a more measurable impact, and that's probably the way it should be, because those areas, I can't get into the urban design aspects. I actually feel for my colleagues who work at municipalities trying to do that, like actually develop regulations that will allow that to happen. But I think we're talking, the committee was discussing symbolism earlier, and I think this is more than symbolic. I think there will be some measurable benefit. It's not going to be the solution, but it's maybe part of a solution, and perhaps a modest part, but nevertheless worth pursuing. And I did forget the first part.
Yeah, and just to the first question about proof of water, that's huge for my community. This and the few conversations I've had around Bill 44, it's about, well, what are they going to do to make sure that we aren't, we're able to have the water to maintain the development that occurs, and what's the CVRD going to do to ensure that that happens?
Yes, thank you for that, Mr. Chair. The answer, I think, is that the existing Works and Services bylaw does have some technical standards, albeit relatively limited. It concerns bacteriological parameters, basically coliform testing that has to be done. It also requires every new parcel being subdivided to have a well on it if it's in such an area. So there probably is still a stock of maybe a limited stock of parcels out there that predated that requirement and don't have wells, and, you know, then the question becomes, okay, what does this building permit trigger require? We're basically doing a professional reliance proposal here in this amendment, where we're saying to engineers or well drilling professionals, you tell us that this is a potable licensed legal supply, or sorry, registered legal supply, and then we'll approve it. Because right now we don't actually have a process triggered by building permits for that. It doesn't go so far as to say you have to drill a well or all the stuff you have to do in relation to subdivision, because in some cases they won't need to drill an additional well, you know, in relation to this, right? They'll be perhaps sharing it if it's an attached suite, for example. So it appeared to be a reasonable way to introduce the requirement. It might be that over time we'll decide that we need to elaborate it with some more technical specifications, but at the moment it seemed like the best approach until we have a bit more information on how it rolls out.
Director McClinton and Nicholson and myself.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
I've got a few clarifying questions. But first, I just want to say thank you to my colleague, Director Nicholson, for just helping me understand a few of the requirements. So I just want to, one of my clarifying questions is, you know, I'll first start with a statement. You know, there's overwhelming support for accessory dwellings in Saltaire. We're going through our local area plan, and there's been multiple meetings, both led by the CVRD and organically led through the community. And there's no question that people want them. The stories I hear from, you know, older folks that are looking to build a secondary suite to have somebody move in and take care of the property, you know, there are many. So there's no question there. But the part that I think the last meeting that I got confused on, and just if you could give clarity, if we add accessory dwellings or carriage homes or secondary units, can you regulate the lot size of which those go on? You know, because my understanding was, and I think I'm wrong on this, if you allow carriage homes for one parcel size, you allow them for all of them. And can you just speak to that for me?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So the draft bylaw that's attached for, I'm sorry, I forgot the number, but for Area G, the non-Bill 44 bylaw, would propose to introduce, like you call them, carriage homes or detached suites for the first time since 2002. And it would not have a site area requirement. But that's not to say it couldn't be changed. Like, you know, Director Abbott, for example, was asking whether, you know, the stroke or the dash on the chart meant that you couldn't have them in Area D anymore. And I said, no, you can. You'll just have a site area requirement. So if your preference is to recommend that they be permitted, but there be a site area requirement, that certainly can be done. That's in line with some other regulations that already exist in, I think, all the other electoral areas right now. So yes, if you want to do that, that certainly could be done.
Follow up. And you know, we're going through this official community plan process in the local area plan, and I'm very hesitant to sort of subvert that. But the only reason I'm getting out ahead of this is just the overwhelming support for this in our community, especially for those folks that want to age in place. Like the clock's ticking for a lot of them, and they may have to put their property up for sale. When would be, you know, when would be the next, like, for some reason, if we remove these off the table today or the board meeting, when would be the next opportunity to sort of usher in secondary suites? Would it be during the local area plan? Could it be at any time? I'm just sort of trying to gauge, you know, what are my options here with that?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, it's a good question. Unless the committee directs it, we wouldn't necessarily bring another report spontaneously back on this topic to committee. However, through notice of motion or some other means, you could, as an individual director, request such a report, say, I don't know, in May or something like that. If we don't do anything with respect to the non-Bill 44 stuff today in Area G, you could request that be done. And I think my division has the capacity to bring that back on an ad hoc basis pretty much anytime. In the absence of that, probably what we're looking at is having a detailed look at this in each community with respect to the new zoning for the entire region that we have to be working on. And that's probably going to happen after the modernized OCP is adopted. So a couple of years down the road, perhaps.
Yeah. Okay.
Director Nicholson.
Thank you. What we haven't talked about yet is the add-ons for the agricultural land reserve areas. And I just like to bring to the attention of the directors, particularly for Area C, proposing to allow detached suites on ALR land in the Cook Silo watershed could pose problematic, or that could be premature, given the discussions that are going on around the Cook Silo watershed planning process. So there are serious concerns about water scarcity moving into the future for the Cook Silo, and I think that ultimately it's the discussion is coming down to one of food and water insecurity, particularly on the ALR lands. And so I think that it would make most sense not to make any changes to ALR land in the Cook Silo watershed until those discussions have completed and there's some more direction on community and farming kinds of development. Because I think so far the discussion is to try and move to a more net water zero kind of future, so that that sort of speaks maybe to development only when you can do rainwater capture and that kind of thing. And I know the standards aren't really in place for that in our region, so it seems premature. So I would encourage the directors that have ALR land in the Cook Silo to remove the added ALR provisions in this report from their section.
Okay, I've got myself, Director Wilson, and Director Martman now. And I just, in the discussion about the potable water for additional units, additional dwelling units, my recollection is that this came from it was a gap in our policies, in that if we were to be considering someone having an additional residence on their property, that it fell wholly to Island Health as far as their regulation. And while we don't, I'm hoping we don't want to get into the specifics of the water quality and microbiology and all of that sort of thing. It was to bring in something into our processes that said, yes, we've had a look and we have got a professional who's willing to say, yes, this could proceed, you could have a building permit. So is that sound more or less like how we got to where we are now?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that was the intent. We heard at the previous discussion, there was a more detailed dive into it. I remember Ian McDonald came up at one point to talk about this gap, the building inspection for a suite not having parameters other than the code in it and the plumbing code. Turn on the tap, does water come out? Yes, we're good to go. But that doesn't really answer the fundamental question of, is there sufficient water on the site? And to have a professional look at that through this amended bylaw that we're proposing, we felt was a good move. And it's not only with respect to suites, of course, it's for any vacant property that maybe doesn't already have a source on it.
Go to Director Wilson, followed by Martman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mike. Just going back to the attached and detached buildings again, just so I got it clear in my own mind here. If it's attached, then obviously you can connect it to the main house supply without any problems. But I think I heard you say that if it's detached, then you can't run an extension pipe because that would not fall under the professional standards that are in service. You would have to drill a second well, is that correct?
Mr. Chair, the answer to that question is, it's really provincial jurisdiction that you're
Yeah.
talking about, and, you know, the province in their Bill 44 document did address the question of detached suites, or what they call accessory dwellings, and they are recommending that regional districts, or at least properties that weren't in a service area, maybe think twice about allowing them for that reason, because their rules say you have to be a water purveyor. So you know, just running a service line from the house to the other thing, sort of under the table. I mean, I guess it works functionally and probably from a health point of view and everything, assuming it's tested, but it's not legal provincially. And so, by putting this in the proof of water requirement, that a professional would have to look at that situation, it's possible that a lot of people who maybe in the past were able to do it for a detached suite would not be able to do it
Right.
because they couldn't get someone to certify that. On the other hand, you could argue that right now we're encouraging provincial, or maybe not encouraging, but turning a blind eye to violations of provincial policy under the Health Act, right? Which isn't a good place to be either. So we felt that this amendment kind of, I don't know, it hopefully would take care of that, but yeah, it potentially could have an impact. And it's not going to be retroactive in effect. I mean, we're not going to actively say you have to conform to this after the fact. It's just for new ones that would come forward after this amended.
And the reason I'm asking is because I know there is a long waiting list to actually get the permit to drill a well from the province, and that could be another delay that's and I must admit, I do have a bit of an ulterior motive for asking these questions, because like I say, I'm going to post this discussion up on social media. The question has been answered here, so I don't have to answer it again later on, kind of thing. Now, one of the things that I follow up, please, Mr. Chair. Director Nicholson did bring up the question of the Coxsila watershed and the question of the ALR. And I fully appreciate and understand the concerns that she's got there. But one of the problems that I see with this is that the ALR and the food security that's been brought up, we need the farmers. And if we can't build the accessory buildings on the ALR that maybe would hold the older parents or the younger workers coming ahead, family members, then it's unlikely that we would have the farmers to produce the food in the first place. So from that point of view, I understand, I do fully understand what the point she's getting at, but at the same time, I'm not sure that we could cast a blanket thing on ALR. There has to be a way of providing for those families, those farming families, in order to continue that family lineage if at all possible. I'm not talking about huge buildings here. I'm just talking about the family members.
Don't really want to get into debating. Can you hold your thought on that, Director Nicholson? I got to go to Director Martman and Abbott first. Director Martman.
So I listen and then I just go like, have I even understood this whole Bill 44? I thought this was an umbrella legislation that affects all of the CVRD, and that it makes, and so correct where I thought this covered that for the most part, most properties will now be permitted to have an attached suite or a detached suite. Okay, so obviously not.
Mr. Chair, no, the Bill 44 requires that all properties that have as a principal use a single-family residence have the permission to have an attached suite. It has some general advice on detached suites, but it's advice, it's not mandatory. So the only mandatory part is in respect of attached suites. And by and large, our existing bylaws do permit attached suites. However, a lot of them have site area requirements, especially in quasi-urban areas, meaning that it's almost impossible to have an attached suite. So in electoral area H, there's not going to be a lot of instances where this change represents any significant change, as I said earlier. But yeah, to try and keep it clear, the detached suite thing is not part of the Bill 44 mandatory stuff. It's part of the optional bylaws that I've presented for each of the electoral areas for, to be considered through that bylaw.
However, when you look at Bill 44, they talk about things that are not, the definition of an attached suite includes buildings that aren't attached. Laneway houses, carriage houses. So those are, so I'm just, it's confusing me. Help me.
Yeah, I think the document, if you are referencing that provincial policy guide that was produced, it is somewhat confusing because bits and pieces of it apply to regional district electoral areas, but the laneway house thing is intended for the urban residents and planners or directors or I guess councillors to look at, because that's the methodology by which these up to 6 units in the most dense single-family areas under Bill 44 in urban areas might be required, to allow those suites. So some of the planners in my position working for municipalities are struggling trying to figure out how are we going to get up to 6 units in the zoning here. One of the solutions could be 2 or 3 small laneway houses and then 2 suites attached to the house and then the house. So there's your 6 units. So the guidance you're seeing in that document is that part of it is really relevant only to municipalities at this point.
Director Abbott.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Tippett, back to water. If the water is supplied via an improvement district, is it similar, and they've got the main house, and they want to just add a detached suite or an auxiliary dwelling unit, can they run their own water line from one to the other, or is it, again, they have to get a second hookup?
Mr. Chair, that's up to the improvement district. They'll have their own metering rules for whether a second meter is required for a detached suite or not. The owner will have to comply with whatever the regional district, the improvement district requires. But I think in theory it would be possible for them not to violate the Health Act, at least by just running a line across, provided the improvement district's okay with that, because it is certified water, right? It's professionally managed, run by professionals.
And in a similar vein, putting a detached suite on ALR land, the proposed bylaws, do they talk about ALR land?
Yes, they do, and thanks to Director Nicholson for pointing that out, that 4 of the 9 amendment bylaws still would propose to permit detached suites in the ALR for the first time. Not exactly for the first time. I think there's one area where they're under certain limited conditions permitted now. They would be subject to any provision of the Health Act respecting detached suites, right? So if the Health Act says you can't have a service line going from a principal residence to a detached one, you have to get a separate license or become a water purveyor, then, or not license, permit, then that's what they're going to have to do. So it may be, given our proof of water requirement, that nobody in the ALR might be able to do that just because the requirement's too onerous, like you have to be a water purveyor, that's super expensive and unlikely, and drilling a second well and everything related to that's also very expensive. So perhaps it's not going to make much of a difference in the end.
Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I just, through you to Director Wilson, I think what I'm trying to let people know is that the Cook Isla watershed planning process is a pretty important process from the perspective of ensuring there's water into the future for food security and for people, and as well as ecosystem services, of course. And so I think that my point really is that I think the planning process should be allowed to run its course, and the advice provided to the CVRD on how we move forward on land use in a sensitive watershed should be taken into, and we shouldn't be trying to make decisions we don't need to make in the meantime. So is my point, and this is definitely an optional add-on. So I would just encourage you not to include it.
Director Segal.
Thank you. I wanted to continue on that topic around just siting of a secondary dwelling on ALR. Is there anything restricting it from, a secondary dwelling plop in the most farmable part of that lot?
Mr. Chair, that's a good question. We are working on a farm plate regulation, but it's not ready yet. We also do, in some cases, have siting requirements for non-farm buildings through development permit powers. So I can't really answer that comprehensively. In some areas, we would have some say over it, and others potentially not. But yeah, again, I think the bigger picture is probably aligned with what Directors Nicholson and Abbott were talking about. How likely is it that we're going to get a flurry of applications for that, given the proof of water requirement, and in turn, the water purveyorship or the second well? I mean, maybe it's a tempest in a teapot, and it's not really a big deal at this point in time. I would say detached suites and site area outside of the LR is definitely a potentially big deal. But yeah.
Okay. And in the recommendation, those 4 points, are the optional pieces in there? Or this is just the bare minimum?
Mr. Chair, the recommendation presumes that all of the draft bylaws in their present form as attached to the report as attachments would be advanced. Now, I heard from the area G director that he might be interested in maybe tweaking the detached suite thing by adding a site area requirement. If that is what the committee wishes to do, that should form part of the recommendation. And if, similarly for any other special provisions that are not entrained in the draft bylaws as they exist now, please add them to the resolution.
And that could also include if any area wanted to remove those optional ALR provisions?
That would be the case, although I'll point out that the optional ALR stuff at the moment applies in areas A, C, B, G, and F. So the other areas is not built into those bylaws already, so there's no need for area I, for example, to say I don't want that in my bylaw because it's not there right now.
Okay, so I'd like to move the recommendation.
Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded.
Can I make an amendment?
You can make it, well, it's on the floor. Go ahead, Director Segal.
I'll just dominate right now. So can I remove those ALR provisions for Area A? Oh, and is that, are A and C tied together?
There's probably a way to do it for Area A only, if that was the desire, or furthermore, I was thinking as this was discussed earlier, we could possibly just identify the watershed on some schedule. I'd have to think about how to do it and make that part of the bylaw. So for the non-watershed co-silo I'm talking about, portions of the area would still apply. Anyway, let's not overcomplicate it. Short answer is yes, it could be separate for Area A or C and C or.
Okay, thank you.
So are you making an amendment?
Yes, please.
Okay. And are we clear on we're not clear? Okay. So could you please repeat or write down exactly what you want the amendment to say?
Yeah, I need help from Mr. Tippett. Is
Yeah,
there
yeah,
a
I
specific
think,
number?
I'm not sure about the exact language to go into the resolution, but what I'm hearing is that the motion would be amended to, for electoral area A only, not permit detached suites on any ALR property within electoral area A.
Are you seconding that?
I will, and I'd like to speak and make a second amendment.
Okay, well, let's deal with the first one. So we have it moved and seconded. We will, in a second, vote on the amendment. Is everyone clear on what the amendment is? Then I'll call the question. All those in favor? Okay, it's.
Sorry, Chair. I just want to make sure, because like Director Wilson, I might want to amend for Area D, but I need clarity on what Director Segal is at.
Mr. Tippett, would you please?
Well, I
Elucidate,
hate to put
please.
words in a director's mouth, but I believe she's asking for electoral area A not to have its amendment bylaw include a provision for detached suites in the ALR within electoral area A, because the draft attached to the report today does include that provision.
And my line of thinking is that I would like to move completely the opposite for Area D.
Well, but we've got an amendment on the floor that's just dealing with Area A right now, so, and you're now third in line. So everyone is clear that we're dealing with Area A, no suites on ALR as part of this is an amendment to the main motion. So I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Unopposed, the motion carries. Director Wilson, you have an amendment?
I think so. What I'd like to see really is how, and I do like the idea that Mr. Tippett brought forward about the Coxsila watershed. And I would love to be able to see if there's any way how much of Area C or ALR is included in the Coxsila watershed. That's not an easy one to come by, is it?
It might be a little easier than it would appear.
Oh, okay.
I probably can't personally do it
No.
in the next 2 weeks because I'm flying to Scotland tomorrow.
Tomorrow will be Mr. Chair, what I'm getting at here is if at all possible, the suggestion that's been made by Mr. Tippett that ALR within the Coxsila watershed of Area C be excluded rather than the whole of Area C, if that's at all possible.
I believe it would be possible. It would just be a question of, preparing the map and probably bringing the draft bylaw back to committee just for verification. So yeah, in theory, I think we can do that.
Thank you, sir.
Hang on, I'm trying to simplify things here. Does this have to go to the next board meeting?
I would say that it would be ideal if the Bill 44 amendments, which are part of this recommendation, go to the next board meeting. The other ones could be held back, referred to another meeting for these fine tunings, which I'm going to say right now would probably be at the earliest April 17th, because we're not under this provincially mandated time pressure on those, and we can take our time to get it right and get it to everyone's satisfaction. Having said that, if there's a desire to go ahead now, we can go ahead and then sort of adjust later, but it's the pleasure of the committee.
Okay, here's where I'm sitting on this one here. You've just described a fairly simple, not referral, but a simple amendment. But I'm going to stop talking and let Ms. Chirolf chime in now. Ms. Chirolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to suggest an option might be just to deal with the Bill 44 specific amendments as a kind of a first course of action, and then deal with the works and services, and then deal with the optional bylaws in a third, so you have multiple resolutions, because you might have different directions from your fellow directors. But the other point was that allowing bylaws to proceed to the board, even for just first reading, allows them to be introduced into the statutory process, and you can amend those bylaws up until the time of adoption. So they don't have to be perfect when they go to the board, is what I'm trying to say. And in fact, some cases, it's nice when they're not perfect because there's an opportunity for, public input and tweaking.
Thank you, Ms. Chirolf. So just so everybody knows sort of the path that I'm trying to go down here. Yes, we could just step back and do the Bill 44 stuff, but I'm thinking that we're far enough into this that I think the request that you've made, can we direct it to staff to ensure that that information is made available and that we include the amendment to withdraw the Coxsila ALR from the AC bylaw as well? And that's a fairly simple amendment.
Yeah, I can live with that one.
Okay. And so you've moved that? Is there a seconder? We have a seconder. So is everyone clear on what the intent of this is? And Mike, you can pass it on to whichever staff person will need to do that. Okay. I'm going to call a question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Director Abbott, you have an amendment.
If I may comment first, given what Ms. Charles just said and the cautionary principle that Mr. Tippett raised, I saw eyebrows raised by Director Nicholson. I was looking at the upland area D, which would not include Coqusala Village, and I suspect that it would not include allowing secondary dwellings on detached dwellings down in the Coqusala Village area. But given what Ms. Charles said, I think we could just proceed first reading, and I can get more information offline before the board meeting.
That's a capital idea. So we don't have another amendment. So we have a twice amended resolution. Is everybody ready for the question? All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed, the motion carries. Yay! Way to go. Thank you, Mr. Tippett. I gotta tell you, R1, 2, and 3 were a handful today, and thank everyone for their efforts on that. It's kind of amazing. So, we've got a little bit more business to do. And we have the applicant waiting, which is that gonna be R4, and then a quick break and then wrap it up. Okay, R4. Welcome.
Hello. A new face up here. Thank you, committee. Good afternoon, committee, and thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's just let Michelle, perfect, thank you. So the application that I'm presenting today has been presented to you before once already, so I'm going to try and keep this choppy. So subject property, it is just a refresher here for you. It is the, oh, can you go back one, Michelle? Sorry. So just a refresher for you where this property is located, and the proposal of the application is to amend the South Cowichan zoning bylaw to permit a cannabis retail store as a site-specific use on this subject property. Since the last time this application was brought before you, it has been referred through to external agencies, as well as had a public information meeting held by the applicant, which is in accordance with our cannabis retail store policy, and those comments are attached to the staff report for your review. Next slide, please. This slide is just a reminder for you to see the 300-meter buffer around the subject property, and that 300-meter buffer is a suggested buffer for certain types of businesses, certain types of adjacent properties. And next slide, please. And then the recommendation is before you. I'm not sure, I think in your oh my gosh, it's been a long day for me too, the agenda. There is a slight change to the wording of the recommendation. I believe in your agenda it says to, I've basically taken out the words to be drafted, so I believe in your agenda it says to, that a zoning bylaw amendment for application number RZ 23A02 be drafted to permit cannabis retail store and forwarded to the board. We have attached that draft bylaw to the staff report, so that has just been removed. And any questions? And the applicant, I believe, has been here throughout the meeting.
Online? Yes. Okay, so just for your information to the applicant, we'll go with questions through to staff now, and when at the conclusion of that, we'll ask if you've got anything that you'd like to add. There may be questions from committee directed towards you. So I gather we've got you. I can't see you. Could we take the recommendation down? There we go. So, Chris, are you with us? Chris, there he is. Perfect. Okay, so did you hear me? We're going to go to questions of the staff person first, to Rashenda, and we'll go from there. So I'll look to committee. Any questions for staff? Go ahead, Director Deck.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report.
Yes, can you hear me?
I noticed in the comments, the referral
Hi.
response
Can you hear me?
summary, that the environmental department, Keith Lawrence, talked about how to he was concerned about the waste that would, the marijuana that might get outside the store. And it is recommended that a cannabis waste product disposal plan be established as a condition of the application approval. So how does that work?
Ms. Woods.
Through the chair, it could be listed as a condition of the rezoning application prior to an amendment or an adoption of the bylaw. Having said that, there are fairly strict regulations in place through the LCRB, Liquor Cannabis Retail Board, that do speak to, opening and consuming products on the site. And aside from anything taking place on the site, we wouldn't necessarily have an avenue to ask the applicant to prepare or provide off-site waste disposal.
Thank you. And there were other comments now. Where can I find them? Oh, shoot, there was a graph and 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 times it said does not meet that part. So what's to be done about that?
So, through the chair.
Go ahead.
Sorry. So these are, it's a policy, it is guidelines that are suggested buffers. Every application that comes under this policy is addressed on sort of a site-specific basis. So, for instance, we have spoken with the Parks Department regarding the Mill Bay Church and Historic Cemetery, and their concerns were very negligible, whether there will be any impact. It's not a park that is highly utilized by members other than those that are going to take a look at the actual museum that's on site there. With regards to something like Brentwood College, they are, well, it is within a 300-meter as the crow flies radius, the access from Brentwood College to the site is more difficult. They have to, basically it's located like down sort of under the highway and on the opposite side of the highway. So there are some barriers, some physical barriers in place already that would limit ease of access to that site by those students. Again, it is just sort of assessed on a site-by-site basis, and their guidelines, they're not necessarily the law that has to be followed, though, yeah.
Was the Malahat, sorry, may
Go
I?
ahead.
Was the Malahat Nation one of the comments? I forget their comments, but were they positive or no comment? I can't remember.
Through the chair, here I was thinking I was so prepared having the staff report in front of me. I don't have the attachments in front of me. I do believe that they were one of the ones in opposition, as it is a place that youth frequent. In my staff report, again, I have made the comment that retail spaces where these stores take place are often places that are frequented by youth, which is part of the reason for staff report there, or staff support there. It is hard to sort of separate those two, but we do try and take a look at it as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Alternate Director Champ.
So you made a comment about Brentwood College and the obstacles to get there, but what about Francis Kelsey?
So through the chair, we did refer to School District 79 as well. We did receive a comment back from them. They did note, they had noted that Francis Kelsey fell within 300 meters. It actually is about 400 meters from, I know it doesn't look that way, it doesn't appear that way, but based on the 300-meter radius as the crow flies, it is about 400 meters from the subject property. And that's property line to property line too, so it's, we didn't go into the middle of the site and take the 300 meters from there. And they do have a policy that also mimics the 300-meter policy.
Director Deck.
Sorry, I forgot to ask, thanks, Chair, forgot to ask this one. is a public hearing always held after the proposed bylaw, or the bylaw gets passed, or it goes up for?
Yeah, through the chair.
Thank you.
No problem. So it would be held at least after first reading and before third.
Okay.
Yeah.
that's
And that
all-
is, yeah, under the Local Government Act. I can't recall it off the top of my head right now.
Perfect.
But yeah, there is wording in the Local Government Act about when it has to be held.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any further questions for staff? Mr. Clay, would you like to provide any additional comment or anything further you'd like to add in relation to the staff report? Chris? Oh, where'd he go? There he is. Do you have any additional comment you'd like to make? He can't hear us.
Sorry, I'm not getting any audio. I'm
No,
having
there-
to listen to this through YouTube, so there's a bit of a delay. But I don't have anything to add. Thank you for your time.
Okay, any questions for the applicant? Be kind of hard, he can't hear us. Okay, it's a long day. Turn to the director for the area.
I'll move the recommendation.
Do we have a seconder? It's been seconded. Any further discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries, and that will be going through to the 27th, a week from now.
Yes.
Thank you. Do we want to power through and get this done? Okay. Next item, Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is item R5. It's a report from Development Services Division regarding bylaw number 4545. And the recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that CVRD bylaw number 4545, Development Approval Information Bylaw 2024, be forwarded to the board for consideration of 3 readings and adoption.
Do we have a staff? Oh, we do. Ms. Woods,
Hello, me
please
again.
go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So switching gears slightly here, one of the tools that local governments use to inform development is the Development Approval Information Bylaw. Next slide, please. Oh, I didn't know that I set up animations on this. Can you hit it again, please? Thanks. So the purpose of the bylaw is before you on the slide, but it is to obtain the anticipated impact of a proposed activity or development on the community, and also to evaluate the impact of the proposed activity or development on the community. And next slide, please. Oh, look at me. Oh, can you hit it one more time? Oh, I guess we're just, there we go. There's the picture I wanted. Okay, so some of the, we did have a previous development approval information bylaw that was adopted in 2011. It hasn't been amended since 2011, and I'm sure we all have seen some changes in the year, or in the last 12 years, so it was time for an update to this bylaw. So some of the key changes in the DAI bylaw from the 2011 version to the 2024 version, yes, include modernizing language and references, expanding types of the DAI, the development approval information that can be requested, enhancing requirements for the report submissions, and also updating procedures and policies in that bylaw. Next slide, please. And this last slide here is just it's not quick, just a very large overview of some of the information that we could request through the DAI bylaw that would be in support of understanding the impacts of development prior to a through a rezoning process or through a development permit process. And I think last slide. Oh, look at me. There we go, and the recommendation is before you.
Thank you for that. Do we have any questions for staff? Director Nicholson.
I'm just wondering if you considered putting specific technical requirements on environmental assessments that would allow us to use information in our GIS mapping program?
Through the chair, so you mean like having a clause to be able to use some of the information provided to us in other avenues?
Well, I know that we don't have maybe good stream locations and that kind of thing, and when you get someone to go to the expense of getting a technical report done, it would be nice to have the information that would allow us to put it into our system so that we would have better information in general.
So through the chair and with a little bit of my previous GIS hat on, part of the problem with things such as stream data is that they do change so frequently that it is one of those features that is incredibly difficult to keep maintained. So while we may be able to consume some of this data, it would be hard to rely on it going forward. Just because of, some of the big weather events that we get could so drastically change some of the drainage networks that we have. But we will have the reports on hand, for sure. And we could speak with GIS. I know, again, sorry, from my previous GIS experience, it is a time-consuming commitment to integrate the data that comes out of these reports. So perhaps that's probably a conversation that would have to happen way above my head.
Ms. Chirolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's an interesting question, and it's one we can explore. The information that we request is specifically for in support of an application, and generally when we accept information or request information, it's for that intended purpose and can't be used for other purposes. But there might be an opportunity to explore in the future a process where we could ask applicants if they would be willing to share that information for other purposes. And the last point I wanted to make is generally the information is provided in a PDF report, not in a way that would be easily integrated into the CBRD's GIS system, but it's certainly an interesting idea.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff? Okay, we have mover of the recommendation. Moved. Second. We did that already? Wow. Must be getting tired. Then, seeing no other hands, call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. That'll go through to next Wednesday. And I don't believe it, R6. We're almost at the end. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item R6 is a report from Utilities Division regarding an amendment to the 2024 budget. And the recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that the 2024 budget be amended to include a new function for Shell Beach Water System Service for the remaining 3 quarters of the 2024 budget year.
Director Martman.
Well, I'd like to squeeze one in just before the budget closes, so I'd like to move this one. Thank you, staff.
Is there a seconder? Seconded. Any discussion? Pretty self-explanatory. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. That takes us to where, Ms. Harrison?
That takes us to question period, Mr. Chair.
A very patient Ms. Kaufman. Ms. Kaufman, do you have anything you'd like to pose?
No. I'm not sure how to take that, Director Clinton. I would like to say, one of the things I like about coming to CVRD meetings, and I know it's got to be a question, but I just wanted to say I love learning new words like nomenclature. Thank you, Mr. Tippett. I am concerned that today some items with Bill 35 were confused with a delayed ESC topic about bylaw enforcement when it comes to tiny homes. And I'm wondering, when will that come back to the board?
That's a good question. I'm going to have to get back to you. I know that we've got some significant reports coming forward from Land Use Services, and I want to say April 3rd, but I wouldn't be right on that. It's been a long day, so I'll have to find out.
Thank you for that. The other thing that I was concerned about, and I'm going to ask the question, is we've already seen issues arise with the harmonization of our OCPs without a corresponding harmonized zoning bylaw. And the other item that was delayed was the comprehensive zoning bylaw. And to hear that it will be delayed yet again until after the MOCP, should they not be coming at the same time?
So I'm not aware of which specific issues are, in your mind around that, but my understanding of normal processes is that, yes, and of course this isn't normal because I don't think there's many regional districts that harmonize 9 electoral area OCPs, and so but normal process, as I understand it, is the harmonization is complete. The modernization is then next, and then the comprehensive zoning bylaw is following, and in this case, we have had some suggestion that it be concurrent or that it be started before the final version of the modernized OCP take place, but in this case, we're not exactly there yet, but it's been my experience in the number of OCPs and zoning that has been done is the OCPs are completed, and then the work on the zoning is following that.
Thank you for that. And that work was done on the harmonized, but there was not the harmonization of the zoning bylaw.
Absolutely, because we knew we were going next to the modernized OCP, and I think that the intent was for us to have a new zoning bylaw that was based on the most current of the OCPs, which, the most current will be the modernized, not the harmonized.
It's a lengthy process, and I imagine with length comes cost. My final question, has the CVRD stopped recording names of the directors who do not vote in favor of a motion?
We record opposed votes at the board. You can ask to have your name recorded as opposed, but at committee, it's simple majority, and we don't record, I believe, in the committee meetings, the opposed.
Okay, so it's only at the board, not in
It's
committee?
only at the board.
Okay, thank you very much.
That concludes question period. There's only one thing left to do.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have no closed session items, so it would be adjournment.
Motion to adjourn. Seconded. All in favor? Thank you, everyone. That was a long day.